It was the summer of '96 in Spencerville, Ohio. The locals called it the Summer of the 13 Vanished. I was just a kid back then. The '90s were all about massive shopping malls, neon colors, Big League Chew, and those disposable Kodak cameras. It's hard to believe now, but we grew up without the internet in our pockets. My older brother had a Motorola pager clipped to his belt, and in our neighborhood, that made him the man. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. I want to talk about a videotape, one that still shows up in my nightmares. That eerie sound of the tape rolling, the mechanical whir of the VCR swallowing the cassette into its dark gut. We were on summer break. School let out in June, and our parents were pulling double shifts at the local auto parts plant just to keep us fed. We were 14-year-old punks left to our own devices. We'd spend all day hanging out at abandoned construction sites, wasting quarters at the arcade, or loitering outside 7-Eleven. Then there were the other spots. Those dingy basement shops that sold comics and used VHS tapes, where you could rent a beat-up action flick for a couple of bucks. Those places always smelled like dust and cheap tobacco, and the light barely fought its way through the grime on the windows. But the second a new bootleg tape started rolling, the rest of the world just disappeared. We lived for horror. Hellraiser, A Nightmare on Elm Street. We devoured them by the gallon, ready to do anything for an adrenaline rush. We'd seen Elm Street 1,000 times already. My buddy Chris had his own setup, a used Magnavox 5CR he got for his birthday. His mom was a single parent working double shifts at the diner, so she couldn't spring for a new one. But even a hand-me-down was a total game changer. Whenever she was at work, we'd spend all day glued to his big Sony Trinitron. Some tapes we watched so much they'd start shedding, leaving those fuzzy tracking lines all over the screen. We were always broke. Me and the guys would scavenge for aluminum cans, mostly Mountain Dew and Dr. Pepper. We'd take them to the grocery store, scan-back machines for 5 cents a pop. It was barely enough for a pack of Twinkies or the latest X-Men comic. Mornings started with The Hunt, checking behind motels and hitting up abandoned parking lots. Sometimes we'd strike gold, like finding copper wiring at a construction site we could scrap. If we were short on cash for a new rental, we'd get desperate and swipe change from Chris's mom's tip jar. We'd catch hell for it later, obviously. But for a new movie, worth it every time. We'd take our haul to Mr. Sullivan at the flea market on the edge of town. It was always a madhouse, people selling knockoff Levi's and sketchy electronics. Mr. Sullivan was this gray-haired guy in his 40s, always wearing a leather vest over a flannel shirt, with a gold tooth and a Marlboro dangling from his lip. He was our main plug. That day, we ran over to trade in a copy of Gremlins for something new. Sullivan flashed that gold tooth and nodded toward a gym bag under the counter. "Yo, check it out, boys. Just got these in. Dig through there, you're bound to find something." We dove into that bag like it was a treasure chest. Action movies, thrillers. "Whoa, check this out," Chris said, letting out a low whistle. He was holding a tape. No cover, no title, just a crude skull painted in red directly onto the black plastic. It looked rough, but that just made it more intriguing. The tape seemed to whisper that whatever was on it would scare the living hell out of you. "Oh, that," Sullivan said, taking it from Chris and turning it over. "I don't know, boys. You might be a little young for this one. This ain't Freddy Krueger. No telling what's on here. Let me watch it first. Then I'll decide if I'm selling it." "Cool?" "Man, we aren't kids," Chris shot back. "Chris, drop it," I hissed, "or we're gonna walk away with nothing." I looked at Sullivan. "All right, Mr. Sullivan. Next time." We kept digging, but everything else looked lame. We ended up settling on Bloodsport with Van Damme. We tossed it on top of Gremlins, which we'd been hyped about only yesterday. Once we said our goodbyes and cleared the stall, Chris stopped dead. He looked at me, dead serious, and whispered, "Don't look back, don't run." I didn't get what was up until he flashed a sly grin and pulled that skull tape out of his jacket pocket. "Did you seriously boost that?" I nearly choked. "Yup," Chris said, puffing out his chest. "Now we've got a real late-night show." We booked it home, dying to see what was on that tape. Chris's mom was on the graveyard shift, so we always saved the scariest stuff for after dark. I'll never forget lying there on the carpet, mesmerized by the glow of the tube. Back then, it felt like we'd never grow up, like there was nothing more important than horror movies and our friendship. Man, was I wrong. But that night, the world felt endless and full of adventure. When the sun went down, we popped the tape in. The old VCR groaned like it didn't have the stomach for it. The screen flickered. Then nothing. I was worried the film was trashed, but then an image flickered to life. It was rough, though. Heavy static, white lines dancing across the screen, and a low, constant hiss for audio. The silence of the empty house only made it creepier. The picture was jumpy. At first, you couldn't tell what you were looking at, but then it came into focus. A dilapidated building. Gray concrete walls, maybe an old lumber mill or a warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was clearly filmed on a handheld camcorder. The frame shook, the angles constantly shifting. "This is garbage," Chris muttered, but I just shook my head. Something about it kept me locked in. The camera moved forward through empty hallways, the beam of a flashlight catching peeling paint. The sound got sharper, a sort of guttural, rhythmic whispering. Suddenly, a door at the end of the hall swung open on its own. I swear, no one touched it. My hair stood on end. "What the hell?" Chris whispered. My gut was screaming at me to turn it off, but I couldn't look away. Behind the door was absolute pitch black. The whispering got louder, more sinister. It was in some language that made my skin crawl. Then, lights started flickering on, one by one, like candles. Soon, we could make out blurry shapes in the dark. They were getting clearer. I wish to God I'd never seen it. There were children on that screen, boys and girls our age. I counted at least a dozen. They weren't standing. They were hanging from the ceiling. Plastic tubes ran from their shriveled bodies into the darkness above. The kids were swaying slowly in time with the whispering. But the worst part? Their eyes. They were wide open, frozen in total, primal terror.
"Wait, what? That's Billy. Billy Miller,"
Chris stammered. Everyone in town knew Billy Miller. He'd gone missing 3 weeks ago. The papers said his door was locked from the inside, and all the cops found was a mess of furniture and a TV left on. Our Sony kept playing The Nightmare. Chris pointed at the screen. It really was Billy. He looked like he'd been drained of his very soul. He was still wearing that blue Cleveland Indians shirt. A dark fluid was slowly pulsing through the tube connected to him. Suddenly, the frame jerked again, and something moved in the back of the room. The whispering became deafening. You could hear a heavy, wet breathing sound. The camera started shaking violently. The hanging bodies began to twitch and convulse, their eyes rolling back. Then, I saw them. 2 glowing eyes, yellow, shot through with red veins, and each one had 2 dull pupils. A black figure rose from the shadows. It didn't look human, didn't look like an animal, just a formless, pitch-black void. It didn't walk. It glided, smooth and silent. Its breath was a raspy wheeze. The image on the screen began to tear apart with static.
Turn it off,
Chris screamed, lunging off the couch. But I was frozen. Those yellow eyes on the screen scanned the room, sliced right through me, and stopped. The whispering filled the whole house. I realized right then it had found us. It was looking at us through the screen. The figure lunged at the camera. It was right there. Those bloodshot eyes filled the entire frame, and then everything went black. The next second, I saw Chris. He'd ripped the power cord right out of the wall. I felt a wave of relief so hard, it made me dizzy.
What was that? What the hell was that?
Chris was hyperventilating, staring at the dead screen. We decided we'd take the tape to the sheriff in the morning. Billy and I played Little League together, Chris said, his voice hollow. Maybe there's still time. I hit the eject button, but the tape was jammed. The mechanism just groaned helplessly. Oh, screw this, Chris cursed. Whatever. We'll take the VCR apart tomorrow. Let's just try to sleep. Sleep didn't happen. I woke up to the sound of tape rolling. That same mechanical whir. I thought it was just a glitch, but then I heard it. The whispering. Right behind our heads. I opened my eyes. The TV had turned itself on. Even though the plug was sitting on the floor. The screen was back, but now it was showing our street. Oak Street. The camera was moving slowly past the houses, past the manicured lawns. It turned toward the house with the bright yellow mailbox. Chris's house.
Chris, look.
I shoved my friend. The camera was already at our front door. The whispering was unbearable now, vibrating in my bones. I scrambled to the window and looked outside. Empty. Not a soul on the street. On the screen, the camera was inside now. It glided through the living room, up the stairs. It was right outside the bedroom door.
We gotta stop this.
I lunged for the VCR, but it was running without power. The whispering became physical, like a cold breath on the back of my neck. That's when the knocking started. Light. Calculated. We couldn't move. We were paralyzed. The TV screen went black, and then those eyes were back. Massive, yellow, burning right through us. Everything in the room started flipping over. The lamps shattered, and magazines swirled in a vortex. Those yellow eyes were sucking the soul right out of me. Chris bolted for the door, but something grabbed him. Invisible tentacles dragged him back, straight toward the TV. Chris fought. He screamed. He clawed at the carpet, but he was being sucked into the screen. I watched his legs, his waist, his chest vanish into the glass of the tube. "Chris!" I screamed, grabbing his hand, trying to pull him back. But the force was supernatural. In a blind panic, I grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the dresser and smashed it into the VCR with everything I had. Once, twice, 3 times, I pulverized the casing. It was too late. Chris was gone. His scream is still echoing in the back of my head. The tape was lying there among the wreckage. I grabbed it and started stomping, ripping the black film out with my bare hands, until there was nothing left but shredded plastic. I sat there in the ruins, unable to process what had just happened. My best friend was gone. The 13th disappearance of that summer. Since then, I stay away from screens. No TV, no computer in my house. People think I'm just a local kook, but I know the truth. It can come back. It's waiting behind every dark monitor, ready to open those hideous yellow eyes again. The door slammed shut behind my partner with a resonant metallic clang, leaving me alone in the silence of the spacious store. It was my first time on the night shift, completely solo in a massive electronics megastore, where my only companions were refrigerators and toasters. The realization sent a dull, unpleasant ache through my stomach. No, being a security guard wasn't exactly my dream career, but the pay was reliable, and I didn't have much of a choice. After graduation, as a young specialist with zero experience, no one wanted to hire me. A classic story, but a man has to eat. Besides, I don't have wealthy parents with spare apartments or high-end connections. So, I took the job as a guard. The work seemed simple enough. Sit in the security booth, watch the monitors, and occasionally do a patrol of the floor. If you hear Vince, don't let it spook you, my partner had chuckled before leaving. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant, and didn't care to ask. Local humor, I figured. Though, to be honest, that smirk of his unnerved me far more than I wanted to admit. Left to myself, I looked around. The store was beautiful, one of the best in the city, or so they told me during the interview. But now, at night, everything looked different. The glossy display cases reflected the pale glow of the emergency lights. Long rows of electronics shelves stretched into the distance, disappearing into the shadows and forcing my imagination to sketch something sinister in the dark. The ceiling, high and curved like the dome of a cathedral, hummed with a low, monotonous vibration. The sound of the ventilation seemed unnaturally loud in the nocturnal silence. I yawned, brewed myself a strong coffee, and sat down at the monitors, lazily switching between camera feeds. The screens showed the same thing: motionless aisles, quiet halls. My anxiety began to fade. After a couple of hours, I thought, why am I, a grown man, so jumpy? Suddenly, a sound drifted up from below. Not loud, but distinct, like a heavy thud against a wall. I tensed instantly, my drowsiness vanishing. I straightened up and glued my eyes to the screen. The first-floor cameras showed total order. Everything in the halls was in its place. The warehouse looked peaceful too. Long rows of boxes and pallets stood in perfect lines. No movement at all. I hesitated for a second or two, but my sense of responsibility for the new job took over. Grabbing my flashlight, I headed downstairs. Descending the staircase, I felt the space around me shift. Upstairs, there was at least some illusion of comfort, but down here, it was cold, smelling of damp cardboard and plastic. I walked cautiously along the walls, listening to my own footsteps echoing hollowly through the empty room. Finally, I stopped at the door leading to the storage area. Everything looked normal. Rows of boxes stood straight and tall, like soldiers on parade. But my eyes snagged on one large cardboard box containing a TV. It was jutting out crookedly from the row, as if someone had accidentally bumped into it or put it back carelessly. Strange, I muttered, stepping closer. Just a minute ago, the cameras showed that box was perfectly aligned, almost flush against the wall. I reached out, intending to straighten it. At that exact moment, a muffled thud erupted from behind the wall. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. I froze, listening. The thud repeated. Heavy, dull, as if someone were striking concrete from the other side of the wall. But what could be behind it? I vaguely remembered the evacuation plan. There was nothing behind that wall. No room, no other section. I took a step back. My flashlight beam danced frantically across the wall, as if hoping to find an answer. Nothing. In that moment, my nerves snapped. Panic rose from the pit of my stomach and tightened around my throat. I spun around and, barely seeing where I was going, bolted back upstairs. The stairs rumbled under my feet. My breath came in ragged gasps. I stumbled, but managed to reach the security booth, slamming the door shut behind me. Feeling cold, sticky sweat coat my back. Standing before the monitors, I tried to calm my racing heart. My hands shook as if I had just run a marathon. There was a sound behind that wall. There was no mistake. It wasn't my imagination, not a creaking pipe, not random noise. Someone, or something, was there. But how? What could exist where the blueprints show only a solid wall and empty space? I sat there until dawn, eyes glued to the monitors, but nothing else happened. The store breathed with night silence, as if nothing had occurred. Only my heart continued to throb, reminding me that this was no dream. Morning came slowly and reluctantly. When the dawn finally chased away the night shadows, I heard the front door open. My relief arrived, a different shift worker. Noticing my exhausted look, he just smirked. "Why are you so pale?" he asked, taking off his jacket. "Did you meet Vince?" I swallowed and tried to force a smile, but it didn't quite work. "I don't know about Vince," I muttered, "but someone was banging on the warehouse wall last night, hard enough to knock a box out of line." My partner laughed shortly, looking at me with a touch of pity, and shrugged. "Don't sweat it, rookie. Stuff happens here sometimes. Walls hum, pipes knock. It's an old building. Your mind plays tricks on you. And that box was probably already like that. One of the loaders probably set it crooked. It happens. We even joke about it, saying the ghost of a guard named Vince lives here. He used to work here. Then. Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, don't let it get to you." I nodded, trying to look convinced, but I couldn't calm down. I returned home, agonizing over the previous night. In the bright afternoon sun, my nighttime fears seemed childish and foolish, but the thought of a second night shift filled me with heavy dread. By the evening of the next day, I forced myself to return to the store. I didn't want to quit the job after just one strange night. It felt wrong, cowardly. I firmly decided, if nothing happened tonight, it meant I was just overworked, and everything was fine. At first, it was quiet. I even started to relax, feeling the cold, sticky knot of anxiety slowly dissolve in my chest. I drank some coffee and took a walk through the sales floor. An ordinary evening, ordinary emptiness and silence. Only the dim flicker of emergency lights played on the smooth surfaces of the display cases, casting flickering shadows on the walls, like thin tentacles crawling upward. I took my time returning to the post, listening to the dull rustle of the ventilation and the quiet pops and cracks that always appear in old buildings when the night takes over. And then, behind my back, the elevator buzzed deafeningly. The sound was so out of place, so alien, that my whole body flinched. I turned around, listening in shock. There was no one in the store. All entrances were locked, the alarm was set, but the elevator was moving slowly on its own. The numbers above the display lit up and faded, reflecting in the glass of the display cases. The elevator was traveling from the basement level straight up to me. My stomach lurched. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth. I dove toward a row of washing machines, hid behind one, and sat perfectly still. listening to the hum of the elevator. Quiet and indifferent, like the breath of something living and ancient hidden in the bowels of the building. Maybe it's a technical glitch, I thought, and immediately after, I heard something else, a human groan, low and mournful. My heart skipped a beat again. Panic began to wash over me in waves, intensifying with every rotation of the mechanism. Someone was in that elevator. A person. I shook with fear. Finally, the elevator stopped. I heard the doors open, and then nothing. I cautiously peered out. The cabin was empty. Only the light bulb inside flickered restlessly, casting strange reflections on the walls and floor. I carefully crept out of my hiding place and looked around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But there was only emptiness. Only me, alone among the shimmering display cases and shadows that seemed to grow deeper and heavier by the minute. Returning to my post, I could no longer relax. My hands shook, my breathing was shallow. I tried to stare at the monitors, telling myself it was an equipment failure, a simple coincidence. But then, one of the cameras, the one pointed at the television aisle, showed movement. A shadow flickered across the screen, fast, light, barely discernible. I squinted intensely, trying to see what was happening. Nothing clear, just a brief ripple in the gloom, like the shadow of a person sliding past a display and vanishing around a corner. I grabbed my flashlight and took a deep breath, feeling panic wake up in my chest again, and slowly went to investigate. As I descended into the hall, I noticed the flashlight beam jumping nervously in my hand, like a searchlight in a storm. Entering the aisle, I froze. For a second, it felt like someone was watching me from deep within the hall, behind the glass of the display cases, waiting. And suddenly, the televisions roared to life on their own, one after another, as if by some invisible command. White noise instantly filled the room with hissing and crackling, a low, monotonous hum tearing the silence to shreds. Static flickered across the screens like distorted faces and figures trying to claw their way out. And then I heard the voice clearly. Weak, hoarse, pleading, barely audible through the noise and static.
Let me out.
I lunged toward the nearest TV, frantically hitting the power button. I could feel my fingers trembling with fear and helplessness, but it continued to hiss. The static danced across the screen, mockingly distorting my reflection. The other televisions didn't react to the buttons either, as if they had gone out of control. In desperation, I ran back to the post and cut the main power, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Instant, deafening darkness fell. Only my flashlight trembled in my hand, a weak, dim spot of light, almost powerless against this ocean of gloom. I stood in the middle of the dark, dead store and realized dawn was still a long way off. My heart hammered wildly, refusing to settle. I tried to convince myself that nothing terrible had happened. Just, I don't know, technical interference or a very cruel joke by the other guards. But the voice that hissed from the TVs was still ringing in my ears, quietly repeating its grim demand. Let me out. No, that's enough of this circus, I thought, listening to the darkness, trying not to flinch as the old office chair creaked under my weight. I'd sit here until morning, then to hell with this job, this store, and all its goddamn madness. I sat staring into the gloom, which seemed to be thickening around me, feeling the night darkness slowly tighten its grip, creeping closer and closer. Suddenly, a distinct sound came from below. A crash. as if something heavy had fallen. I leaped to my feet, feeling cold, viscous fear slide down my spine again. The sound repeated with such force that it felt like the entire floor vibrated. I instinctively looked at the monitor, but it was off. Of course, I had cut the power myself. My heart beat even faster. I had to gather my courage and check again. If there were thieves and I just sat up here, I wouldn't be able to prove anything later. Gripping the flashlight, I slowly descended the stairs, listening to every step echo in the total silence. The darkness below was almost tactile. It felt like it was wrapping me in a thick, damp blanket. When I reached the storage area, the flashlight beam caught an unexpected sight. The boxes that had recently stood in a perfect, flawless wall were now strewn everywhere, pushed, scattered, as if someone huge and angry had tossed them aside in a fit of rage. And then, a strike. The wall in front of me literally shuddered, and the vibration caused the boxes to shift slightly. I broke into a cold sweat. How was this possible? There shouldn't be any rooms behind that wall, but the blows continued, methodical and strong, as if someone were desperately trying to break out. I slowly moved closer, pushing boxes aside, trying to ease the sticky horror crushing my chest. I started moving them hesitantly at first, then faster, until I discovered something that sent a cold wave down my spine. Hidden behind the piles was a door, an ordinary metal door with peeling paint, behind which I was certain there should be nothing but a concrete wall. But it was there, absolutely real, and the muffled thuds were coming from right behind it. I took a step back, and at that moment, a voice came from behind the door.
"Let me out. I don't want to be alone."
The voice sent a jolt of heat through me. There was a person in there, a trapped person. Forgetting my fear, I rushed to the door, feverishly pulling out my ring of keys. My hands shook, the keys jingled, and like a madman, I shoved them into the lock one by one, trying to find the right one. "Just a second, hold on!" I shouted in a trembling voice. Finally, the lock gave way with a soft click. The door swung inward with a nasty metallic screech, revealing an old security post, almost identical to mine upstairs, but clearly abandoned years ago. Dusty monitors, a dirt-covered console, and a chair. The air held a stale, suffocating smell of dampness. Inside, there was no one. Not a soul, not a movement. Even the air seemed stagnant and dead. I stood on the threshold of that room, trying to understand what had just happened, where the voice had vanished, and who, for God's sake, had been banging so desperately from the inside, begging to be let out. The room was empty, as if no one had ever been there. My heart thudded loudly in my chest, trying to leap out. I stood there, trying to process it all. The flashlight beam swept nervously over the old monitors and the dusty control panel. The silence was so thick and tangible it felt alive. A thought hammered in my head. This is impossible. A minute ago, someone was here. Someone was calling out, hitting the door, screaming in despair and loneliness. And now, nothing. Just a frozen, derelict room. Suddenly, the flashlight beam caught some writing on the wall. "I don't want to be alone." Next to it were finger marks, and the writing itself looked as though it had been done in blood. With great effort, I forced myself to turn around, left the room, and gently pulled the door shut, as if afraid to wake something that might still be hiding in the dark. I walked back upstairs, slowly. The steps under my feet felt viscous, like I was walking through a swamp. The sensation of a strange gaze burned the back of my neck, and even when I locked myself in the booth, it didn't go away, as if someone were watching me from the dark corners. I spent the rest of the night clutching the flashlight, which flickered on and off due to a weak battery. With every passing minute, the tension eased slightly, but the realization of what had happened wouldn't let me rest. The strange door, the invisible guest, and that haunting voice repeating, "Let me out." Morning came reluctantly, foggy and gray, as if the sky itself was afraid to chase away the night. I heard the lock of the front door click below. I felt a wave of relief, however faint. A different shift worker entered, but not the one from yesterday. This was an older guard I had only seen once when I was hired. A man in his 50s, graying, with observant and slightly tired eyes. Everyone here just called him Old Sam. He noticed my state immediately and nodded silently, as if unsurprised. "Rough night?" he asked calmly, as if it were routine. "I'm not coming back here. This place, it isn't normal," I stammered. The words tangled, refusing to form a story. "Look, something is happening here. Something bad. I didn't just hear noises. There were voices, and a door downstairs, and no one behind it. Though someone was definitely there, I heard them." He looked at me intently, seriously studying me, and then said quietly, "So, you let him out?" I flinched, feeling a chill run down my spine. Who? Who did I let out?" The guard sighed tiredly, rubbed his face as if deciding whether to continue, then nodded to himself. "It was a long time ago, maybe 10 years, he began, sitting on the office chair. "I had just started. There was this one guard, a young kid. He was a bit different, you know? Not all there. Simple-minded, trusting, a fool, to put it bluntly." He paused, frowning. "The guys who worked here back then liked to play jokes on him, and one day they crossed the line. They locked him in the old security booth downstairs. Just a joke, they thought. They went out for lunch. When they came back a couple of hours later and opened the door, they saw bloodstains on the walls. The kid had beaten his head against the concrete, you see, and he'd written on the wall in blood, 'I don't want to be alone.' When they opened the door, he was already dead. No one told anyone he'd been locked in there. They wrote it off as a mental breakdown, said the kid was just sick in the head. He snapped, and that was it. They moved the security post upstairs, blocked that door with boxes, and forgotten. Or rather, they tried to forget." I was silent, feeling an icy horror slowly penetrate every corner of my consciousness, displacing the last remains of calm. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and stood up, grabbing my jacket. "Yeah," the old man said quietly. "So it's true, you let him out. The brave ones always do, braver than our local thugs. They can only laugh, but you know, they're terrified to stay here at night. They feel something, but they pretend everything is fine. That's why they joke about the ghost. Hell, even I couldn't listen anymore. My legs carried me outside into the gray, foggy morning. Returning home, I immediately wrote a resignation letter and sent it by mail. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying not to think about the night's events. Though the old man's words and the image of the empty room with that horrific message on the wall remained burned into my mind. The next morning, a phone call woke me. It was the store. I answered with trepidation. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was nervous, strained. "Listen, I saw the resignation, but we have a crisis. Can you come in for a shift tonight? We need someone urgently. There's been a problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked hoarsely, feeling my heart begin to race again. "It's Sam. They found him dead at the post this morning. Looks like he snapped or something. He did it to himself. Look, can you just come in tonight?" I said nothing. My hand began to shake. Cold paralyzed my entire body. Without a word, I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear and, saying nothing, hung up. I was driving back to the Hollow, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the steering wheel. My mother had called me 3 times in the last 2 days. She never reached out over trifles, but this time, her voice over the line was trembling, as if the very ground was crumbling beneath her feet. "It started again," she said. Those words got stuck in my head, snagging like splinters. What started? Something with the house? I didn't press her over the phone. I just packed my bags and hit the road. The landscape outside the window shifted slowly. First, the well-kept interstates, gas stations, and supermarkets. Then, thinning trailer parks, peeling bus stops, and crooked power lines. The further I went, the thicker and heavier the air became, filling with dampness. By evening, as the Hollow finally loomed ahead, the GPS gave up for good. The strip of road turned into a gray void. I remembered this place differently. In my childhood, it felt alive. Kids racing on bikes, old folks warming themselves on benches, dogs lazily trotting through yards. Now, everything was empty. Abandoned houses, boarded up windows. In the few scattered gardens, there were only the rusted skeletons of greenhouses and overturned troughs. When I turned onto the main street, suspicious eyes tracked my car. 2 old men on a porch froze like statues, their eyes locked on me. A woman by the well, seeing the car, grabbed her bucket and quickly vanished behind a gate. I pulled up to the house. My mother stood on the porch, hunched over. In the year since my father died, she seemed to have shriveled, withered, and aged into an ancient woman, though she wasn't even 60 yet. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken. When I stepped out of the car, she took a step toward me and said in a trembling voice,
"You're here."
I nodded, wanting to smile, but couldn't because of the lump in my throat. I hugged her tightly and asked, "Mom, what happened?" She looked away.
"Later. Come inside, son."
I stepped over the threshold, and a feeling washed over me that I had stepped into the past. The house smelled just as it used to. Dried herbs, the wood stove, and something sweet. But the walls felt as if they had closed in, becoming tighter. "Mom, you still haven't told me what started." She sat at the table, slumped over.
"Just stay with me, please, at least for the end."
The words stung. "What do you mean, for the end? What are you talking about?" She remained silent, staring at a single point and nervously fidgeting with a handkerchief in her hands. I sighed, deciding the conversation could wait. Let her rest, let her calm down. Then we'd figure it out. I spent the whole day with my mother, helping around the house, trying to draw her into conversation to distract her from her dark thoughts. In the morning, we went out to the garden, though there was nothing to do. It was too early for planting. The ground was still cold, but Mom wandered between the rows anyway, as if she were checking for something. I joked that it was time to quit this place and move to the city, but she only shook her head and gave a sad smile. Later, we fixed the fence, or rather, I fixed it. Mom stood nearby, watching me nail the crossbar while she fidgeted with the edge of her apron. Tears glistened in her eyes every now and then. "Mom, come on, what is it?" I muttered, leaning against the cold boards. "Everything is fine." She nodded, but before she could answer, a gate clicked nearby, and I instinctively turned around. Walking quickly down the road was a woman in a long wool skirt, wrapped tightly in a shawl. I recognized her. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable. When I was a kid, she used to bring us fresh honey. Now, Mrs. Gable walked without looking our way, but as she drew level with us, she suddenly shot a glance. Her eyes were anxious, wary. Her lips moved silently as if she wanted to say something, but she changed her mind instantly, quickened her pace, and vanished around the bend. I frowned. "Mom, what's going on here?"
You were going to help me with the potatoes.
she said suddenly, as if she hadn't heard my question.
Come on, we're almost done.
All day she was as if in a fog. She barely spoke. She washed the dishes, muttering something under her breath, and when I playfully took her hands and spun her around the kitchen like a dance, she even laughed, but then immediately burst into tears, burying her face in my chest. "Mom, what's wrong with you?"
Forgive me, son.
she sobbed, wiping her eyes.
Forgive me.
I squeezed her shoulders tighter. "Maybe you should move to the city. To hell with this house, this hollow. Dad is gone. You're all alone here. If you want, we can pack up tomorrow, and I'll take you back. You can live with me."
No.
she interrupted. Her voice was firm. "But why?" She remained silent for a long time, and then she looked at me with such seriousness that it made my skin crawl.
Because I can't.
she finally said, and stood up to clear the dishes. I didn't push or argue. I just decided I'd talk to her tomorrow when she was in a better mood. Closer to night, Mom went to her room. I finished my tea, checked the door, turned off the lights, and lay down in my childhood bedroom. The bed seemed strangely small, though it used to feel huge. It smelled of wood, old books, and wool blankets. When I closed my eyes, I could still feel my mother's gaze, her strange words. I knew right away I wouldn't be able to sleep. The silence in the house was too thick, too viscous. In the city, even at night, you hear the hum of cars, dogs barking, heels clicking on asphalt. Here, there was nothing but the creak of wood somewhere on the roof, as if the house were sighing in its sleep. A few hours later, I drifted into a light sleep, but in the middle of the night, a sound woke me. A quiet, almost gentle tapping on the window. I froze, listening. My heart thudded heavily in my chest. I sat up slowly. Pulling a throw over my shoulders, I got out of bed. My legs felt as heavy as lead. I stepped toward the window, but didn't open it right away. First, I pulled the curtain back slightly. There was no one behind the glass, only a smudge, the dark, smeared print of a small palm. I yanked the window open. The night dampness hit my face. The moon illuminated the yard, but there wasn't a soul, only the old well, the rusty bike Mom kept for some reason, and the trees sitting like black shadows along the road. I waited, listening. Silence. I closed the window and stood there for a while, staring into the dark. It still felt as if someone was standing behind the fence, watching. I exhaled and went back to bed. The rest of the night passed quietly. In the morning, walking out into the yard, I saw footprints, bare feet, despite the cold. They started right under my window and stretched away past the fence toward the road. Maybe kids playing around. But there were no kids left in the hollow, not for a long time. Only old folks. Whatever, I thought. Nothing bad happened. Someone just knocked on my window. Big deal. I tried to push the strange incident out of my mind, but the memory of that black handprint on the window continued to burn. The day passed in a viscous fog. I tried to distract myself with chores, but my thoughts kept returning to the nocturnal knocking and the footprints. I wanted to talk to my mother, but she was distant, as if she didn't hear me. She made lunch, washed dishes, even smiled occasionally, but there was a void in her eyes, and her fingers were always fidgeting with something. The edge of her apron, the hem of her robe, a button. After lunch, I went out into the yard again. The air was heavy and damp. A mist crawled over the ground, though the sky had been clear that morning. At the neighboring house, a man sat on a sagging porch, head hanging low, hunched over as if he were freezing. I looked closer. "Hello," I said softly, but the old man paid no attention. He sat there, staring at his feet. His lips were moving as if he were muttering something, but I couldn't make out the words. "Hey," I stepped closer. The old man suddenly raised his head slowly. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot. "They're here," he whispered. I froze. "Who?" But he didn't answer. He just turned away and disappeared into the house, leaving me standing in the thickening mist. By evening, Mom had withdrawn completely. I sat in my room, leafing through an old book, but I couldn't see the letters. My thoughts were tangled like autumn leaves in muddy water. Time passed midnight, and I finally fell into sleep. In the middle of the night, the same tapping returned. I grit my teeth and turned away, trying not to listen. Damn pranksters, I thought. I decided if I ignored them, they'd just leave. I didn't move, and then footsteps echoed through the house from two sides at once, from the attic above and from the basement below. I sat up abruptly and smelled it. Smoke. A pungent, suffocating smoke that made my throat itch. Is there a fire? Through the wall, I heard a muffled, long drawn-out groan. I jumped up and rushed into the next room. Mom was sitting on the bed, rocking back and forth. There was no smoke or fire to be seen, but the smell grew stronger. Mom's eyes were wide open, but her gaze was glassy, as if she didn't even see me. "Mom?" I grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. "Mom, wake up." She jerked, startled, and suddenly her gaze cleared.
They're here,
she whispered, and then with a quiet sob, she collapsed into my arms. "Who's here?" I could feel her shaking.
I don't want to die.
She gasped into my chest. "My God, I don't want to die." Quiet, quiet. "Don't worry, Mom, I'm right here," I whispered, holding her tighter. Her shoulders shook with small tremors. Her breath was erratic. Her hands clawed at my shirt as if she were afraid I would vanish into thin air.
They're here,
she repeated, barely audible. Who, Mom?" But she only shook her head, as if warding off something terrifying. I carefully pried her fingers loose and helped her lie back on the pillow. "I'll be right back, Mom. Don't go anywhere, okay?" She didn't even nod. She just squeezed her eyes shut. Her lips moved silently. I ran to the kitchen and fumbled through the medicine cabinet for her sleeping pills. When I returned, she was still lying there, hunched over as if trying to become smaller, to hide. I shook a single pill from the bottle, grabbed a glass of water, and held it to her lips. "Here, take this, Mom." She swallowed it with a shaky gulp, shivered, and coughed. "There we go. Everything is going to be okay." I sat beside her until the medicine took hold and her breathing became more even, until her eyelids began to flutter shut. She fell asleep quickly, like a child exhausted by long tears. I watched her in silence. A year ago, I would have immediately decided her nerves had simply given out. Grief, loneliness, age, it all weighed on her, and she broke. But damn it, I heard it too. The footsteps, the smell, the knocking. This wasn't just her sick imagination. Something was happening here. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The hours dragged by painfully, but sleep wouldn't come. Before my eyes stood my mother, her fear-filled eyes, her voice. "They're here." Who were they? I asked myself that question over and over, until the morning light slowly spread through the room. It was time to talk to someone. A few hours later, I was standing at Old Man Silas's house. He'd lived here as long as I could remember, and even in my childhood, he looked like an ancient man. He must have been over 90 now. Silas knew everything and everyone in the hollow. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, gave me nails for my fort, and helped me fix my fishing rod. My father used to say, "If something happens, ask Silas. He knows everything." I hoped that this time he'd have the answers. When I approached, old man Silas was already sitting on the porch, smoking. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said, without looking up. "It's been a while." "It's hard on your mother," he nodded, tapping ash. "Do you know what's wrong with her?" I suddenly felt anger rising in my chest. "She's scared, Silas. She says they're here. She was groaning all night, then crying, saying she doesn't want to die." I paused, but he remained silent, just slowly finished his smoke. "It's not just her fears," I continued. "I heard it all myself last night. Someone was knocking on the window. I saw footprints this morning. Bare, small ones. Footsteps in the house, in the attic, in the basement. And the smell of smoke." The old man stopped smoking. "Smoke?" he asked slowly. "Yes." Silas was quiet for a long time. "Tomorrow's the anniversary," he finally said. "That's why they've come." "What anniversary? Who's come? I've had enough of your riddles. Tell me what you know." Old man Silas spoke reluctantly. He asked if I remembered the Abernethys. The name was familiar, but no faces or details came to mind. Then he told me their house burned down 20 years ago, when I was just a kid. From the moment they arrived in the hollow, rumors spread that the mother was a witch. They said she started the fire herself, locked the doors, and wouldn't let her husband or children out. Some thought it was a ritual, a sacrifice for some power. Others just believed she'd lost her mind. Either way, she died that night along with her family. But since then, Silas claimed, people continued to see her. Every 10 years, on the anniversary of the fire, she appeared in the hollow. No one knew how, but everyone knew why. To take someone with her. 10 years ago, many people died. The Millers, the Sawyers, and several other families. Since then, people had scattered. There were few left in the hollow now. "But they say," Silas added, "she'll find you anywhere. You can run, but you can't hide." Now, another 10 years had passed. Tomorrow was the anniversary. That meant the witch was looking for a victim again. I listened to him, feeling a sticky cold rise inside me. Silas wasn't joking or trying to scare me. This wasn't just a local legend. He told this horrific story as a matter of fact, as if explaining why there's snow in winter and green grass in summer. "Probably," he added quietly at the end, when I asked if it was her who came to our house last night. I remembered the Abernathy house stood at the edge of the hollow, near the forest. We boys rarely ran that way. The adults didn't approve, and even the bravest kids avoided that side. A memory surfaced. A wide yard, an old fence with broken boards, a porch covered in wood chips. I don't know why, but my feet carried me to that cursed house. I expected to see at least some traces of the fire. Charred beams, brickwork, rusty iron, overgrown with weeds. But where the house once stood, there was only empty, scorched earth. No weeds, no remains of a structure, no nails or stones. It was as if nothing had ever stood there at all. But the smell was sharp and suffocating, as if someone had recently lit a bonfire and let it burn down to smoldering coals. I licked my dry lips and took a few steps forward. A chill ran down my spine. It was stupid, but it suddenly felt as if I turned around. I wouldn't see the hollow, only an endless field and dense forest ahead. I looked down. In the grass to the side, something dark caught my eye. I leaned over. It turned out to be a child's doll, rotted with time. Only bits remained of its cloth flesh, threads poked out everywhere. One button eye hung by a thread, rolling as if it were watching me. I picked it up and suddenly heard a rustle. I snapped my head up. A few steps away stood a woman, thin, tall, pale. I couldn't make out her face, but I saw the wind faintly fluttering her long dress. She slowly shook her head and said, "Don't touch." Her voice was quiet and steady. There was no threat, only unbearable sorrow. I froze, and in the next instant, she was gone. I stood there alone. I was still holding the doll in my hand, but now it was burning hot, as if it had just been pulled from a fire. I jerked and threw the doll into the grass. The wind hit my face, heavy and foul. The smoke stung my throat, and I coughed. I looked at the empty spot where the woman had just been. Suddenly, it became very cold. Without looking where I was going, I bolted back to the hollow, toward the people. I didn't walk. I nearly ran, terrified that the woman's ghost would catch me. The smell of smoke still lingered in my chest. My throat was dry, my heart pounding desperately, as if something inside me understood more than I did. When the hollow appeared ahead, I immediately sensed a change. It was as if the place, which had seemed sleepy but alive that morning, was now dead. Not a single person on the street. Even the dogs that barked at passing cars during the day had vanished. I turned onto the main street and caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone pulled a curtain back, then quickly hid in the darkness of the house. Further along, the slow creak of a gate. But as soon as I turned my head, the yard was empty. I stopped and looked around. Ahead, on his porch, stood Old Man Silas. He was staring straight at me, unblinking, with an expression that sent shivers down my spine. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong, but he suddenly turned abruptly, went inside, and shut the door with a dull thud. When I entered the house, the familiar heavy smell hit my nose. Not smoke, no. The smell of tears and grief that had spread through the entire home. Mom sat on the bed, holding a crumpled handkerchief. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking. "Mom?" She raised her head. Her gaze was either anxious or exhausted. She was tired. She closed her eyes and exhaled.
Forgive me, son. Forgive me.
"For what? What are you talking about?"
We all knew.
She whispered.
I knew, too.
Mom took a heavy breath, as if making a decision, and tiredly ran a hand over her face. It seemed she had shed the burden of long silence, but instead of relief, her face showed something else. Emptiness. "We all knew," she said slowly. Everyone in the hollow knew what really happened. I didn't breathe. I only listened, feeling a frozen lump rise to my throat. 20 years ago, everyone here was afraid of her. They were always afraid, as long as I can remember. People whispered that Mrs. Abernathy was a witch, that the neighbor's husband withered away because she drew the life out of him, that the sick children weren't born that way by chance, but because she touched them with her hands. The cattle died. It was her fault. The fish in the river became fewer. It was her. The men drank. It was her again. People fear what they don't understand, and if they fear, they look for a reason. She spoke steadily and calmly, but it seemed to me that the further she went, the harder it was for her to breathe. No one knew if it was true or not, but fear rots a person like gangrene. First, people stopped going into their yard. Then, they stopped saying hello. Then the children became afraid to play nearby. They lived as if behind an invisible line in their house, surrounded by silence in a hollow void we created for them. Mom lowered her head, clutching the edge of her handkerchief. And then, someone said we couldn't just wait, that one day she would destroy us, that we had to. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to say it. We had to make it end. You mean we burned their house down? I finished for her. The air in the room grew thick. We waited for night, waited for them to sleep. Someone brought kerosene. Someone laid straw against the walls. We stood in the yard and watched the fire climb toward the roof. "My God!" I gasped, but Mom wouldn't let me get a word in. They woke up almost immediately. I heard Mr. Abernathy beating on the door, trying to break it down. I heard the children screaming. They ran out onto the porch, and the people, they drove them back in like cattle. My chest tightened. Why? Because they were afraid. Mom suddenly looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. Because fear is stronger than anything. Because if she survived, she would take revenge. No one wanted to look her in the face. No one wanted to hear her curses. We thought if they burned, if the house collapsed and buried them all, we would be safe. She fell silent. I heard her words echoing in my head. We thought we would be safe. She held the children, covering them with her hands, shielding them from the fire until the very end. I saw them die. I couldn't believe this story, that my mother had stood there and watched people burn. Someone later said they heard her whispering something before she died. No one knows what, but since then, she's been seen. I couldn't speak. Mom covered her face with her hands.
We deserved this.
And then came a knock, slow, heavy. I jumped, as if waking from a nightmare. A second knock from the attic, a third from the basement, and the air filled with the thick smell of smoke. Mom rose slowly, as if her strength had finally left her. She ran her palms over her face, wiping away tears, and straightened up. Her eyes were dry, her voice calm and steady.
They won't leave, son. They come for the guilty.
I didn't immediately understand her meaning, but in the next moment, a scream echoed through the hollow. I rushed to the window. It was as bright outside as day, but not from the moon, from fire. Houses were erupting one after another, as if an invisible hand were holding torches to them. In that crimson light, I saw them. 4 shadows. A tall, broad man with a small child's hand clutching his. 2 children, small and thin, and beside them, the woman in the long dress. Their faces remained dark voids, but even through the thick heat of the fire, I felt their gaze. They moved slowly, but inevitably. They stopped at every house, looked into the windows, and then the walls would burst into flame, sealing the people inside. Through the window, I heard a neighbor trying to kick his door down, pounding with his fists, screaming. His wife appeared in the window, but before she could take a step, a dark female hand rested on her shoulder, and she turned in terror. Then the fire surged up, consuming them. In another house, someone wheezed and coughed in the suffocating smoke. A face appeared in a window, a man with bulging eyes gripping the frame. But something behind him jerked him back, and he vanished. I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, a new sound came. Not from outside, but from within. Right here in the house. I slowly looked up. Our house was burning. Flames crawled slowly along the walls, like living things, licking the ceiling beams and breathing out thick black smoke. "Mom, we have to go," I gasped and turned around. She stood still, hands clenched into fists.
Run. You aren't to blame.
She said.
They didn't come for you.
I grabbed her by the arm and pulled, but she broke free and took a step back.
Run, son. I deserved it.
I froze. "Mom, what are you saying? I'm not leaving without you." She smiled sadly.
Go away.
I grabbed her by the shoulders and tried to drag her to the door, but she suddenly became heavy, unmovable, like stone. "Mom, please!" The house roared. I snapped my head up. Dark streaks ran along the walls. The smell of smoke became unbearable. The air shivered and cracked. The door flew open with a crash. On the threshold stood her, the same woman. She looked directly at me, and I suddenly understood why they feared her. Not because she killed, not because she cursed, but because she knew the truth. She stepped forward and took my hand. "Come." An invisible wave threw me outside, and I only had time to look back. Mom stood in the very center of the burning house, illuminated by tongues of flame. Her face was peaceful. She didn't scream. She didn't try to escape. She simply closed her eyes. I tried to rush back, but the woman held me tight. It was a superhuman strength. "Watch," she whispered. I watched the hollow burn. The fire soared to the sky. People pounded on doors, trying to get out, but something unseen held them inside. They were driven back, just as they had once driven the Abernathys. It lasted an eternity. I didn't realize at first that the night had turned dark again, that the wind had carried away the smell of smoke, and that only the black skeletons of houses and ash remained on the ground. I stood in the middle of an empty town. "Is it over now?" I asked, not turning around. But no one answered. I was alone. My dad is a big, blue-collar guy, tough as nails, the kind of man who's seen it all and survived even more in his time. But that night, when he stumbled through the front door around 3 in the morning, I barely recognized him. As he crossed the threshold, he was as pale as a ghost, his skin looking almost translucent under the hallway light. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely unlace his heavy work boots, and his face was a mask of deep anxiety, and, I would even say, pure, raw terror. I wouldn't have been so shocked to see him like this 7 years ago, back when he first took that job at the county crematorium. It's a grim way to make a living. In those early days, he'd often come home looking like he was about to break down. He'd sit at the kitchen table, pour a heavy glass of bourbon, and talk about the 1,000-yard stare of grieving parents, or how he'd just cremated a child. He'd describe their faces, the way they looked into the void, their eyes having already cried every tear they had for years to come. He mourned alongside them, and back then, he was terrified to even glance through the thick viewing glass of the massive furnace where the caskets were consumed by the roar of the flames. But as they say, a person can get used to anything, and my dad was no exception. Over time, the job became just another shift. Cremating remains became a routine, no different for him than a short-order cook flipping burgers or a mechanic changing oil. I won't go into the how or why he ended up there. Let's just say life's circumstances didn't leave him much choice. So, it's the middle of the night, and I'm still up, messing around on my phone, when he walks in. "Dad, what happened?" He didn't even look at me. He just kicked off his boots and headed straight for the kitchen in total silence. "I'm fine," he muttered under his breath, but his voice sounded hollow. "Look, I'm not an idiot. Something's wrong. Problems at work?" Realizing I wasn't going to let it go, he sighed. I don't even know if that's the right word for it. He grabbed a bottle of Jim Beam from the cabinet, filled a tumbler to the brim, and downed it in one go, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. He hadn't touched the hard stuff like that in years. My mom woke up then too, as if she could sense the disaster in the air.
"Bill, why so late?"
She grumbled sleepily, walking into the kitchen. He wanted to tell us, but he didn't know where to start. His eyes were darting around, and his speech was beginning to slur from the shock. Seeing him like that made Mom's heart race.
"Bill, what is wrong with you? You look like you've been through hell."
Once she saw the bottle, she assumed it was just a bad day at the facility. But after hearing what he'd been through, it became clear that a bad day didn't even come close. This is his story, exactly as he told it. This woman comes in earlier today. She'd made an appointment over the phone, everything by the book. The director mentioned it was a young girl, beautiful, tragic, way too young to be gone. But the mother, something was wrong with her. She kept breathing down our necks, pacing, asking how we could speed up the whole process. We explained that once the paperwork was cleared, we'd start, but she was in such a frantic hurry. She wanted that girl burned right that second. She even tried to slip me a couple of $100 bills. I told her I don't take bribes and I don't skip the line. I refused once, then twice, and on the third time, she looked at me in a way that made my skin crawl. It was a look of pure malice, like I had personally ruined her entire life. She just turned around and slammed the heavy steel door so hard, the lights flickered and the fixture nearly flew off the ceiling. I stood there watching her go, while my partner, Miller, just tapped his temple, calling her a nutcase. A bit later, the supervisor comes by and says, "Paperwork's cleared. The body's coming tonight." When the casket arrived, it was a joke. A crude plywood box, looking like it was hammered together from scrap wood at a sawmill. In 7 years, I've seen some budget funerals, but this looked like a packing crate. As we were moving it onto the lift, I caught a whiff of it, that unmistakable smell of rot. It's our policy to verify the remains, so I went to open it, but the lid was nailed shut, tight with heavy nails. "I'm sorry, ma'am," I said to the mother, who was still lingering. "I have to check the body. It's protocol."
We already said our goodbyes.
She snapped back, her voice shaking. She was desperate to get that box in the fire, as if she were trying to hide a crime. I told her the ashes would be ready in a few hours and asked about an urn. She started toward the shop, but then she doubled back, leaned in real close, and whispered,
Can you just dump the ashes? Throw them in the trash or scatter them somewhere?
I could barely keep my temper. I told her, "This is your daughter. You didn't give her a service. You didn't buy a real casket, and now you want to throw her away like garbage." She didn't say a word. She just turned and walked away. Miller and I hauled the crate to the retort. We found a crowbar and started prying the lid. The more we pried, the worse the stench of decay got. "Is she rotting already?" Miller hissed, covering his face. It was the girl, all right. Her face was still intact, but her body was covered in lividity and weird stains. The certificate said she died yesterday. "Impossible," Miller muttered. "One day dead, and she smells like a week in the sun?" We loaded her in and shut the heavy iron door. I went out to the loading dock for a cigarette, trying to get that smell out of my nose. I was standing there when Miller came charging out, looking white as a sheet. "Bill, you gotta hear this. I think I heard someone screaming inside the furnace." I just groaned. "Miller, if you've got a flask in your pocket, share it. Don't drink it all yourself. The body is decomposing. Gases are escaping the lungs. You know that." We went back to the viewing port and looked inside. The crate was scorched and blackening, but there were no flames, just thick, oily smoke. The control panel started beeping. The gas had automatically shut off. I reset the pilot. The burners roared back to life, and the fire started climbing. "Equipment's acting up," I told him. But 5 minutes later, it happened again. The fire just died. We cranked the heat to the max and sent the burners into overdrive. I stayed glued to the glass this time. The fire was roaring, finally reaching the body. And then, I saw it. The girl's hand arched up. I tried to tell myself it was just a cadaveric spasm from the heat. But then the gas died a third time. The red alarm light was flashing, and when I looked into that window, the girl's charred face was pressed right against the glass, staring back at me. I looked away to Miller for a split second, and when I looked back, it wasn't the girl anymore. There was a thing pressed against the glass. I'm not a religious man, but I started crossing myself right then and there. It wasn't the girl. It was something alive, and it was horrifying. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. It was a damn monster. Naked, blackened skin, with a head the size of a beach ball. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a seam of burnt skin stretched tight over a skull. And that seam was split wide open like a jagged wound. And inside, things were moving. White, fat worms crawling in the gap of its face. The creature started thudding against the door. The hits were so heavy, the whole concrete floor was vibrating, and the walls felt like they were going to crack. Miller lost it. He started screaming, Turn it on! Burn it!" He slammed the override on the ignition. A sound erupted from that furnace that I'll hear until the day I die. A screech like a freight train crashing, mixed with the voices of 100 people screaming in agony all at once. Our brains just shut off from the pure horror of it. We ran when the viewing glass finally shattered into 1,000 pieces. The building was empty. Everyone else had gone home. We hit the main lobby. The doors were deadbolted. We ran for the loading dock, locked from the outside. The keys were back in the machine room. We dived into a supply closet and pushed a heavy shelving unit against the door. We could hear it through the walls. Heavy, wet, dragging footsteps. It passed our door. We waited, then made a break for it. We found a side window in the office, smashed it with a chair, and scrambled out. Miller busted his ankle on the pavement, and I had to carry him on my back to the main road, like I was back in the service. The last thing I saw was that thing standing at the window, its split head just watching us leave. Dad finished the bottle of bourbon, and we all tried to go to sleep, but the air in the apartment felt heavy, like it was charged with electricity. I noticed Dad couldn't stop looking over his shoulder, his eyes darting to every shadow. In the bedroom, a family picture Mom had kept for years suddenly fell off the shelf and shattered, even though there wasn't even a breeze. Later, when Dad was heading to the shower, he dropped his work clothes in a pile in the hallway. As I walked past, I saw the fabric twitch. I looked closer. There were white, fat corpse worms crawling out of the collar of his shirt. I wanted to wake Mom, but she was already deep asleep. I figured I'd wait until morning. It was the worst mistake of my life. I didn't wake up to an alarm. I woke up to the suffocating smell of smoke, thick, oily, and black. The hallway was a wall of fire. My parents' bedroom was the epicenter, completely engulfed in flames. My mom didn't even have a chance to scream. She was lying there, charred and breathless. And my father? He was just gone. No body, no clothes, no documents. Everything that belonged to him had vanished. I called 911 and barely made it out the window myself. We buried what was left of Mom the next week. I don't know where my dad is now, but I have a theory. That woman wasn't trying to bury her daughter. She was trying to burn something that was using her daughter as a shell. And when that shell turned to ash, it found a new one. It took my parents, and I think it's still out there, walking around in my father's skin, waiting for the right moment to do something even more horrific. By the time I was heading back home, dusk had already settled over the street. Heavy gray clouds hung low over the rooftops, and a biting chill was blowing in from the riverfront. I lived on the edge of town in a crumbling Victorian, a relic with ornate trim, weathered shutters, and peeling paint. Honestly, the city should have condemned the place years ago, but somehow it stayed standing, like it had been forgotten by time. I'd inherited the unit from my grandmother. I couldn't really complain. Plenty of space, quiet neighbors, and even though the house was ancient, it stayed warm. Sometimes you'd notice it, a specific kind of silence. Nothing like the constant hum of engines, voices, and neon static you get downtown. Word was that back in the day, maybe the 70s, the building had been some kind of boarding school or a private orphanage. Later, they'd partitioned it into apartments and moved people in. Out of the 6 units, only 4 were currently occupied. There was a college kid on the second floor, Tyler, a quiet guy you'd barely notice. Next to him was a single mom, Sarah, with her 10-year-old son. They were always polite, but you could see a bone-deep exhaustion in Sarah's eyes. I'd heard she was scraping by on meager child support and whatever gig work she could find. Life hadn't been kind to them. On the first floor, right across from me, lived Mrs. Gable, a sweet old lady with kind eyes and an absolute obsession with needlepoint. That was the apartment I found open when I got home that evening. The door was cracked just an inch, barely noticeable, but it caught my eye immediately. Inside, it was pitch black. I stopped. A thought nagged at me. She was getting up there in years. What if she'd tripped or just forgotten to lock up? It was a quiet neighborhood, but leaving the door ajar like that was asking for trouble.
Mrs. Gable?
I called out, leaning toward the gap. Silence. I knocked, lightly at first, then harder. The sound felt jarringly loud in the sleeping house. I winced, a cold shiver crawling up my spine, as if some part of me already knew what was waiting inside.
Mrs. Gable, it's me, your neighbor.
To be honest, I didn't want to go in. It's someone else's home. Maybe she'd just fallen asleep or stepped out to see a friend. But then again, an open door was an invitation for a break-in, and Mrs. Gable wasn't young. My heart sank. What if she'd had a stroke or a fall?
I'm coming in,
I announced before stepping inside. The hallway hit me with a wave of cold. It was bizarre. Usually, the building stayed toasty. The old radiators hissed like they were supposed to, but in here, it felt like a meat locker. There was a faint, cloying scent in the air, the smell of something damp and stagnant, like a flooded basement. I flicked on my phone's flashlight. The floral wallpaper was familiar enough, but it looked washed out and sickly under the blue LED beam. Mrs. Gable, it's your neighbor. My heart started hammering against my ribs, and my legs felt like lead. A light was on in the kitchen. I headed that way, every floorboard creaking under my weight, making my pulse skip beats. Mrs. Gable was sitting at the table. As I got closer, I froze, a scream dying in my throat. She was perfectly still, her head slightly bowed. In her hands, she held her needlepoint, 2 kittens playing in a basket. It looked like she'd just paused for a second to think, except for one thing: her eyes. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing, and when I did, I nearly retched. Thick black thread had been crudely stitched through her eyelids, pulling them shut. The knots were so tight the skin had torn at the corners. Dried blood left dark, rusty streaks down her cheeks. Her mouth was sewn shut, too. The stitches were jagged and uneven, as if done in a frantic rage. Her teeth peeked through the torn flesh, and thin ribbons of dark, almost black blood had pooled at the corners of her lips. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at her. My brain, flat out, refused to make sense of it. What was this? Who would do this? Why? Suddenly, the air felt thicker, heavier. In the dark hallway, a shadow flickered and vanished into the bathroom. My chest tightened.
Who's there?
My voice was cracked and thin. Silence was the only answer. God, what do I do? It felt like a waking nightmare. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Is this some sick joke? Am I losing my mind? What if the person who did this is still here? As if to answer me, a soft thud came from the bathroom, something hitting the floor.
Oh, hell no.
My legs moved before I could think, bolting for the exit. Halfway out, I remembered I'd left my own door unlocked. My hand reached for the knob, but I yanked it back. There were streaks on the handle, something sticky and dark. Blood. Terrified out of my mind, I scrambled into my apartment, slammed the door, and threw the deadbolt. I didn't even make it 2 steps before my knees gave out. I slumped to the floor, back against the cold wood, shaking uncontrollably. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure the whole house could hear it.
What was that? Jesus, what was that?
The thoughts wouldn't stop. It felt like the house had suddenly come alive, like the walls had soaked up something ancient and foul. I closed my eyes, trying to get a grip. But the moment I did, the image flashed back. Mrs. Gable with her eyes stitched shut, her withered hands clutching that embroidery hoop. I snapped my eyes open and scanned my apartment.
I'm safe here. This is my home,
I whispered, like a mantra, but I didn't believe a word of it. Something clicked in the kitchen. Or did I imagine it? Probably just the house settling. I forced myself to stand. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. I even hallucinated that the hallway mirror didn't show my reflection for a split second, but someone else's face.
Enough.
I tried to calm down, but a voice inside hissed. What if you're not alone? What if it followed you in? I was shivering like I'd been caught in an ice storm. I crept over to the sofa, sat down, and pulled a throw blanket up to my chin like it was armor. I fumbled for my phone. Should I call 911? What if they suspect me? I'd entered the apartment without permission. Evidence, fingerprints. I don't know how that stuff works. But in movies, the guy who finds the body is always the first suspect. I could already see the headlines. Local man arrested in brutal slaying of elderly neighbor. No. If I tell them the door was open and I just walked in, they'll think I'm lying. Why else would I be in there?
Not my business. Not my business,
I repeated. Every sound made me jump. The old house groaned. Floorboards popped. Something scratched in the attic. I was feverish. I didn't know what to do. My eyes were glued to the door. I could swear someone was standing right behind it, breathing, waiting. I wanted to hide, to disappear. Let someone else find her and call the cops, just not me. I sat in the dark for hours, afraid to move. I listened. From above and below, I heard sinister noises. Footsteps, quick and light, like a child running back and forth. And then laughter, high and thin. I never believed in the paranormal, but right then, the house felt sentient, trying to drive me mad. After a few hours, the icy grip of terror loosened just enough for me to think straight. You idiot, I muttered to myself. You should have called the police immediately. What normal person just sits here? But before I called anyone, I needed to know what was happening. Maybe the neighbors saw something. If I was going to be questioned, I needed an alibi. I got up, threw on a jacket, and opened my door as quietly as I could. The hollow echo of my steps in the hall made me flinch, but I kept going. I glanced at Mrs. Gable's door. Strange. It was closed. I stopped. The blood on the handle was gone. Clean, like it had never been there. Doubt swirled in my head like a storm. I stepped closer, and fighting every instinct to run, I tried the knob. Locked.
What the hell is going on?
I whispered, feeling the fear surge back. I needed to talk to someone to tell me I wasn't going crazy. I headed upstairs to the single mom's place. Her door was slightly ajar, and the hair on my neck stood up. "Hello?" I called softly, pushing the door open a bit wider. It gave a long, slow creak that echoed through the stairwell. I stepped over the threshold and knew instantly that something was wrong. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, like life had been sucked out of the room. I walked into the living room. Sarah was on the couch, leaning over a book. Her son was on the rug playing with matchbox cars, eyes downcast. It looked like a perfect family portrait. Almost. I stood there, turned to stone. It was the same as Mrs. Gable's. I didn't even look at the boy's face. I already knew what was there. Silent and helpless, I recoiled, my skin crawling. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone. The screen glowed, but where the signal bar should be, there was a red X. No service. I stared at the phone, powerless, as if looking at it would make the bars reappear. What the fuck? I breathed. A thought hit me. Tyler, the student across the hall. He had to have a phone, or at least some explanation. I ran back out, forgetting my own fear, and charged toward his unit. I didn't even knock. I just yanked the handle and it gave way. Unlocked. I stood in the doorway, my stomach knotting with a foul sense of dread.
Tyler, you in here?
I yelled and stepping inside. Silence. The living room was empty. The kitchen, too. The place felt oddly hollow, though everything was in its place. I walked to the bathroom, took a deep breath, and shoved the door open. He was sitting in the tub, buried up to his neck in gray, dirty suds. His head was cocked toward the door, staring right at me. Eyes and mouth stitched shut with the same heavy black thread. I couldn't breathe. The mundane details made it worse. A bottle of Old Spice on the ledge, a loofah. But the water was dark, saturated with blood. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand.
Shit.
I hissed, choking on my own panic. I scrambled through the apartment, frantically searching for a phone. My hands fumbled over shelves, the couch, a desk piled with papers. Then I saw something that made me stop dead. Photocopies of old newspaper clippings, dozens of them. The one on top caught my eye, a photo of an old building. My building. The house looked malevolent in the photo, black hollow windows like empty sockets. The headline read, "Orphanage Closure." The tragedy buried in the walls. My legs felt weak. I couldn't look away from the text. January 16th, 1975. The St. Jude's Home for Children on Lee Street was shuttered following a discovery that shocked the nation. During a wellness check, local police discovered the bodies of 28 residents, ages 8 to 14, in the building's basement. Investigation revealed the deaths were linked to the systematic abuse of the head matron, Mary Ann Vance. It was uncovered that Vance had employed disciplinary measures of a horrific nature. Specifically, the suspect admitted to stitching the eyes and mouths of the children shut under the guise of protecting them from sin. According to her statement, she wanted to ensure they saw no evil and that their mouths spoke no evil. With every word, the air in the room grew colder. The next article mentioned that 30 years later, the former orphanage was renovated to give the building a second life in hopes of burying the tragedy. The world tilted. This wasn't a random act. Tyler must have found this out before me, but he couldn't get out in time. A horrific realization burned through me. This wasn't a serial killer, wasn't a person at all. It was the house, or whatever lived inside it. And now, it was coming for me. The floorboards creaked, like someone was running in the next room. I jumped. Today was January 16th, the exact anniversary of the closure. Exactly 50 years. I bolted for the exit and flew down the stairs. I had to get out of this godforsaken place. To my horror, the front door was locked tight. No matter how hard I threw my weight against it, it didn't budge. It didn't even rattle. The house wasn't letting me go. The windows had bars, and there was no back exit. What do I do? The basement. I remembered. There were small, narrow windows down there without bars, facing the north side of the street. It was my last shot. The basement door hung on rusted hinges. I shoved with everything I had, but it held firm.
Open up, damn you.
I rasped. Suddenly, from deep within the house, a low, drawn-out groan echoed. At that exact moment, the door creaked open, as if the house, sentient and mocking, was giving me a chance. The basement greeted me with an icy draft and a heavy silence. The humidity clung to my skin. My flashlight beam hit old, rusted pipes. Dust crunched under my boots. Thick cobwebs draped from the ceiling like funeral veils. The stench of rot was overpowering. On one wall, I saw drawings, childish, messy. The kids couldn't see what they were drawing. Lines crossed at weird angles, creating terrifying figures with X's for eyes and mouths. On the floor lay a broken Weeble-Wobble toy, a single child sneaker, rusted spoons, small crucifixes, and in the middle of the basement stood 2 metal bed frames without mattresses. Everything down there felt like it was trying to tell a story. Through my own heavy breathing, I heard a rustle. I swung the light around. There it was, a dollhouse. It was a perfect replica of this building. Every window, the roof, the doors, even the crack in the siding. Inside the dollhouse was miniature furniture and dolls. Every single one of them had their eyes and mouths stitched shut. In one room, a tiny rag doll sat hunched over a table, an actual needle in its hands. On the second floor, 3 more dolls, one with a book, one on a rug, one in a tiny bathtub. The last room was an exact copy of my own apartment. It was empty. For now. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered and died. Total darkness. And then, a thin, childish voice.
You're too late.
Along the walls, I saw shadows, long, distorted things.
Play? Will you play? Come on, play with us.
The Weeble-Wobble toy on the floor tipped over with a dull thud. Laughter, high-pitched and piercing, erupted from everywhere. The shadows grew sharper, thin, childlike figures with stitched-up faces.
You're going to play with us.
The voice echoed in my head. I tried to lunge for the door, but my legs buckled, like invisible hands were gripping my ankles. They started singing something, dragging out the words like a nursery rhyme. This was it. They were taking revenge for what happened 50 years ago, tormenting others the way they were tormented. One of the shadows leaned over me. I saw the needle, tiny and glinting.
You won't leave. Everyone stays.
I screamed, pressing my hands over my ears. My eyes started to pull shut on their own, like someone was tensing the lids. I felt a sharp prick at the corner of my mouth, sharp as a needle. A dark thread began to pull tight, sewing my lips together.
This is better.
The voice whispered.
You'll be just like us.
Panic surged, but a thought sparked in the back of my mind. It's a house. They're playing, and every game has rules.
Fine, I'll play,
I screamed. The laughter cut out instantly. I spun toward the dollhouse, grabbed it, and started shaking it violently, dumping everything out. The dolls hit the floor, the tiny furniture scattered.
How's that for a game?
I yelled, slamming the dollhouse onto the concrete. It cracked. The entire basement filled with a low roar. The shadows wailed, darting around like tongues of fog. This was my chance. I lunged for the window. The voices were sobbing in a dozen different tones. The narrow window was stuck. I grabbed a nearby brick and smashed it into the glass. It spiderwebbed. A second hit, then a third. The glass shattered. The cold night air poured in. I let out a feral yell. Squeezed through the opening with everything I had, and finally tumbled out onto the pavement. I lay on my back, gasping, staring at the house. The window I'd crawled out of looked like a mouthful of darkness. The house stood perfectly still. A dim light flickered in the windows, and in every single one, silhouettes stood. They didn't move. They just watched me with their X eyes. I scrambled to my feet, and without looking back, I ran. That little blue pill in my hand was my last resort. At first, I just stared at it for a long while. I was terrified. I couldn't bring myself to do it, but eventually, I closed my eyes and swallowed. The effect was almost instant. I never thought I'd sink this low, but going days without sleep is a slow kind of hell. No, it's worse than that. You just lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for your body to give up. But it won't. Every night turns into a session of pure torture. I'd tried everything humanly possible before I got my hands on these pills. They're so new that even their name doesn't show up in a search. At first, when this soul-crushing insomnia started, I tried teas, essential oils, meditation. For the first month, I'd lie there listening to recordings of ocean waves, nature sounds, God knows what else. I bought some stupid specialty pillow and a heavy weighted blanket. Then came the serious stuff, prescription sleeping meds. But those made it even worse. My body would be paralyzed, but my brain stayed wide awake. You lie there like you're in a body cast with your eyes shut, while this feeling gnaws at you from the inside that you're not actually sleeping. Months went by like this. My life was spiraling. Work turned into a mechanical struggle for survival. Coffee, phone calls, spreadsheets. I looked like a ghost. At first, my boss pretended not to notice, but then he pulled me into his office. He told me that either I get my act together or he'd have to find someone else for the job. Things at home became unbearable too. Chloe, my girlfriend, tried to be supportive at first, but the longer it went on, the more I'd catch her giving me this heavy, tired look. She lasted 3 months. After one particular night, when I was just pacing in circles around the apartment, she packed her bags. "Paul, I can't do this anymore. You've changed, and it's just too hard to be around you. I'm sorry." I don't blame her. She was right. I mean, what did I have to offer her? Just this obsessive, sleep-deprived version of myself. I was living in a fog. Every night started with the hope that maybe, just maybe, tonight everything would fix itself. Miracles happen, right? But it always ended in emptiness. I felt like I was slowly losing touch with reality. I'd catch myself having weird thoughts more and more often. Sometimes I felt like I just couldn't take it anymore. So, when I heard about this new sleep clinic, I booked an appointment immediately. To be honest, I didn't even read the ad. I just saw the name, something like the Center for Somnology and Neuropsychology. A guy from work handed me a brochure and said it was expensive, but supposed to be effective. The consultation cost me half a paycheck, but I went anyway. The line in the hallway felt endless, half asleep, pale people, just like me, waiting for their turn. The air was thick with tension and a deep sense of gloom. Someone was staring into space. Someone else was mindlessly scrolling through their phone. They looked like regular people, but you could see that familiar, deep-seated exhaustion that eats into your very soul. When I finally got into the office, I was met by a doctor in a white coat. He looked to be in his 40s, calm, with a direct gaze and a confident way of carrying himself. He told me to take a seat and started asking questions, I told him everything, not leaving out a single detail. My failed attempts, the pills, the sleepless nights. He listened intently, nodding occasionally. There was an understanding in his eyes, like he'd heard this story 1,000 times before. "We could try one specific method," he said. "We have some experimental medication, a new generation, developed specifically for complex cases. The results have been good, but the side effects aren't fully understood yet. You'd have to sign a waiver and understand that all potential risks are on you. So, what do you think? Want to try?" I sat across from him, feeling my fingers instinctively curl into fists. Of course I was scared. The word experimental sounded creepy. But then again, did I have a choice? "Let's do it," I said firmly, and I basically signed my life away with that short, harmless word. The first night with the pill was a godsend. I slept like the dead. I woke up for the first time in months without feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My head was clear, my body felt light. The world looked brighter, like someone had turned up the contrast. I felt like a human being again, not a shadow. In the morning, for the first time in forever, I actually smiled at myself in the mirror. The doctor was right. The drug worked. At the office, everyone was shocked. I was getting through everything easily and with a smile, even though usually work feels like a prison sentence to me. Only a week had passed, but I felt my life changing. It was a genuine miracle. But the joy didn't last long. A few days after I started the meds, the dreams began. These damn dreams. The first dream crashed into my consciousness suddenly, without the usual gradual drift into sleep. I was standing in a strange hallway of an apartment building, damp, dark, and unwelcoming. A light bulb on the ceiling was flickering, throwing short bursts of light onto the peeling walls. I was standing on the landing and couldn't understand how I got there. The familiar yet alien outlines of the hallway burned into my mind, leaving a foul taste. A floor below, a door slammed. Probably the main entrance. The sound of footsteps followed, hollow and uneven. I looked up. A woman in her 30s with long, dark hair tied back in a ponytail. She was carrying 2 large grocery bags. They were groaning, sounding like they were about to rip. "Good evening," I said in a voice that didn't sound like mine. She turned around, looking a bit surprised, then gave me that forced smile people give neighbors whose names they don't remember. "Hi," she muttered and tried to pass me. I took a step forward. "Those look heavy, the bags." She stopped and her face softened. "A little. The elevator is out again, and I've got to lug these all the way to the 5th floor." "Can I help?" I offered. She was about to nod, but suddenly she looked down at something and recoiled sharply. "No thanks, I've got it," she answered quickly, a sudden caution in her voice. She turned away and hurried up the stairs. I followed. The woman picked up her pace. She was almost running now, constantly looking back over her shoulder. "Which apartment are you in?" she asked, her tone turning sharp. "Listen, do you even live here?" she said louder. She's scared, I realized. And not just scared. She was terrified. But why? I stepped closer, and then her face shifted. Her eyebrows shot up, her eyes went wide, and the corners of her mouth started to tremble. Terror was etched into every movement she made. "Don't come any closer," she whispered, backing toward a door. "Hey, what's the matter?" I started, but she wasn't listening. She was frantic, trying to jam a key into the lock, but her hands were shaking. The keys slipped, hitting the floor with a loud clang. She tried to scream, but I grabbed her roughly and clamped my hand over her mouth. "Quiet, quiet. I didn't want anything bad to happen. I really didn't. But as I said it, I felt something dark boiling up inside me. I raised my hand, and in that instant, I was engulfed by a piercing ring. The alarm clock. I was lying in my own bed, in my own room. Cold sweat was dripping down my temples. What was that? The question looped in my head as I tried to steady my breathing. My heart was thumping in my chest, and the hair on my arm stood on end. I sat in bed for a long time, but the sensations from the dream wouldn't let go. The woman's face twisted in fear, the smell of the damp hallway. It all felt terrifyingly real. All day, I kept telling myself it was just a dream. Things like that happen, right? Just my brain processing some random stress. Nothing unusual. But something was gnawing at me from the inside. Just a dream. Don't overthink it, I kept repeating. Besides, despite the nightmare, I felt great. Fresh, rested, ready to take on the world. I couldn't give this up. Couldn't give my life back because of one random dream. The next night, I took the pill again and fell asleep. The dream came fast. I was standing in silence, surrounded by trees. The air was damp and cool, smelling like earth and cotton candy. This is the park. It clicked. It was familiar. My friends and I used to hang out here when we were teenagers. I still lived pretty close to it. In my palm sat a heavy object. The cold of the iron felt strangely good against my skin. I looked down. A hatchet. A small hatchet with a shiny, perfectly sharpened blade. The metal hungrily caught the stray glints of moonlight. The handle fit perfectly in my hand, as if the tool had been made specifically for me. Crap, I muttered. I tried to open my fingers, but they wouldn't move. My hand held the hatchet tight with a strange, borrowed confidence. In the dream, my body moved forward on its own, determined, steady. I walked along a path winding through the trees. A female figure appeared up ahead. In the dim light, a short jacket, sneakers, jeans, headphones on. Even from this distance, I could hear the muffled music coming from them. My pace slowed, but I didn't stop. My breathing quickened. "Hey," I wanted to yell, but only silence left my lips. The woman turned her head as if she felt my stare. My body accelerated. I stepped toward her. In that moment, she saw the hatchet in my hand. Her eyes went wide. "What do you want?" I saw her backing away, pulling off her headphones. "No! Stop!" I really wanted to stop, to tell her it was some kind of mistake, but my body kept moving. The blade of the hatchet flashed, and a muffled scream broke out. She turned and bolted, but I, or rather, my body, was faster. We raced down the narrow path. Branches scratched my arms and face. I could see her shoulders, her back. I could feel my legs relentlessly closing the gap. At one point, she tripped and fell. I froze, standing over her. She looked up, terror frozen in her green eyes. My hand raised the hatchet. In the moonlight, the blade glowed like fire. In that moment, I became truly terrified. I didn't want to do this, but my arm swung back, my muscles tensed, and the hatchet flew down. Just before the impact, I heard a desperate scream, and then everything vanished. I woke up like I'd been shot. My hands were shaking. I couldn't catch my breath. The room was dark, and I felt cold sweat sticking to my skin. God, what was that? A dream. It's just a dream, I kept telling myself, staring at my trembling fingers. But the feeling of weight in my palm wouldn't go away. It felt like I was still gripping the hatchet in that very hand. In the kitchen, I downed a glass of water and lit a cigarette. I don't usually smoke in the morning, but this, it's just a dream, I told myself, watching the faint trail of smoke drift toward the ceiling. Or was it? I paced the apartment like a clockwork toy, checking the locks even though I knew no one could have gotten in. I pulled the curtains shut, like someone was watching me. Everything inside was burning with anxiety. I needed to do something, distract myself, but my mind kept circling back to those dreams. Eventually, I decided to go for a walk, clear my head, and I practically forced myself out the door. Outside my building, the usual neighborhood gossips were sitting on a bench, talking. "And you're sure? Right in the park?" "Yeah, our park. Lord have mercy, what is the world coming to? They say he hacked her to pieces with a hatchet, can you imagine? She was young too, only about 30. My chest tightened. No, that can't be. It's a coincidence. Just a coincidence. I tried to find a logical explanation, but my thoughts were a mess. Dreams couldn't be reality. It was absurd, ridiculous. But what if it wasn't a side effect? What if it was something else? What if I wasn't just seeing this? "Enough," I said out loud, as if I could order myself to stop thinking. The old ladies gave me a suspicious look. I cursed under my breath and hurried back home, where I continued to lose my mind. Quit the pills. Yeah, that's probably what I should do. But then I remembered what it was like not to sleep for weeks, staring at the ceiling, losing my grip on reality, howling from exhaustion. After all, I'm not becoming a killer because of some dreams, right? I needed to talk to the doctor, tell him everything. Maybe it really was a side effect. They didn't warn me about this, but who knows? While I was debating it, the next night came. This time, I was standing in the entryway of a regular apartment, a specific wallpaper pattern, a mirror with a chipped corner. From the entryway, I could see into the living room. I looked down with dread. The same hatchet, shiny, sharp, was in my hand. Damn it! No, not this, I thought, but my legs were already carrying me into the room. I stepped inside. There was a woman there, very similar to the other two women from my dreams. The same long dark hair in a ponytail, green eyes. My hand gripped the hatchet tighter. I took a step, and the floorboards creaked. She spun around, locking eyes with me.
Who are you? What do you want?"
she asked, her voice trembling.
"It's okay. It won't hurt,"
I said. Or rather, I didn't. My lips formed the words, but I didn't feel them as my own. I stepped closer. She jumped up and screamed, her eyes filling with panic. I raised the hatchet. My arm moved with confidence, with cold calculation. She tried to push me away, but her strength was nothing. In that moment, I noticed a tattoo on my own wrist, a black spiral, winding into infinity. Hypnotic, mesmerizing. She hit me with something heavy. I stumbled, but I only grinned wider. I felt that smugness. The steel bit into flesh. Blood. A scream. The hatchet swung into the air again. I wanted to scream, to stop, to run, and then I woke up. I bolted out of bed with a raw scream.
No!
Drenched in cold sweat. My chest felt crushed. I paced the room frantically until I realized it was just my bedroom. But no relief came. The thumping in my ears drowned out everything except one image, the tattoo on the wrist, a black-as-night spiral, pulling you into infinity. Why did it stick in my memory so clearly? I went to the kitchen, turned on the tap, and started drinking greedily. My hands were shaking so hard that a glass seemed like a bad idea. It's just a side effect, a dream, nothing more. I tried to convince myself. It's not real. But the hatchet, the tears, the screams, it was all so real that I could physically feel the cold metal in my hand and the smell of blood in the air. I made a firm decision. I had to go to the doctor. They had to know something. They were the ones who prescribed this. I grabbed my jacket and ran out. A gray winter day, slushy snow underfoot. The scenery matched my mood perfectly. On the way, I relaxed a little and even felt a sliver of hope. Surely they could fix this, adjust the dosage, and the nightmares would stop. Surely. But when I got to the clinic, I froze. There was a sign on the door, "For lease, office available." No logo, no sign that a medical center had ever been there. It was like it never existed. I stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do. Panic started rising in my chest. Did I get the address wrong? I thought, frantically trying to remember the way. No, this was it. The empty office mocked me with its silence. When I got home, I reflexively turned on the TV. Channel surfing, I hit a news report. A journalist was standing in front of an apartment building, her face grave, her voice flat.
Late last night, a brutal murder occurred in this building. A woman was found with multiple injuries. The murder weapon was a hatchet. Investigators believe the suspect entered the apartment through an unlocked door.
I felt my blood turn to ice. They showed a photo of the victim on the screen. It was her, the woman from my dream. My head spun. That same scream rang in my ears. And her terrified face flashed before my eyes. How is this possible? I must be going crazy. To hell with it. I had to stop with these pills, the dreams, all the murder and the horror. The pills went into the trash, one after another. Enough. Enough. Better to have insomnia than this. The first night without the pills was long. I tossed and turned, remembering everything. The insomnia came back, but with a sense of relief. A week passed. I was back to being that guy who doesn't sleep at night, but somehow, by some miracle, I was staying afloat. Every morning met me with heavy eyes, a ringing head, and a hollow feeling inside. But it was better than seeing blood. Only one detail wouldn't leave me alone. That tattoo. It haunted me even when I was awake. I had this nagging feeling that I'd seen it somewhere before. It was too familiar, too real to be just a figment of my imagination. But there was no answer, and the longer I searched for it, the tighter that black spiral seemed to wind. The city kept living its usual life. But those are the moments when things happen that flip everything upside down. I was coming home from work and stopped at a grocery store. There, by the checkout, I saw him. Andrew. I recognized his face immediately, even though it had been about 10 years since I last saw him. I immediately remembered his snarky laugh in class and how he always got straight A's in PE. He was always the leader, a bit arrogant but somehow magnetic, though he never had much luck with girls. Maybe it was the scar that stretched from the corner of his mouth all the way to his ear? Rumor had it Andrew's mom gave him that scar when he was a little kid. She used to drink a lot and was generally a bit out of it. Basically, Andrew came from what they call a troubled home. Andrew noticed me too. He smiled and nodded.
Paul? No way.
He walked over quickly and stuck out his hand. I instinctively shook it, and in that moment, I saw it. On Andrew's wrist, under the thin strap of an old watch, there was a tattoo, a vortex, the exact same one I saw in my dream. Now I understood why the tattoo looked so familiar. I really had seen it, many times. I felt my legs go weak. The image from the dream flashed before my eyes. The hatchet, the killer's hand, the screams.
Andrew?
Was all I could get out.
Yeah, didn't recognize me, did you?
He was smiling warmly, seemingly oblivious to my shock. "How many years has it been, Paul? 10, probably?" We walked along together, and I didn't know what to do with myself. Andrew got that tattoo back in 10th grade. We were all insanely jealous back then. It was the height of cool. But now, I couldn't shake the thought that it meant something more than just a drawing. We talked. He asked how I was doing, what I was up to, brought up old school jokes. I tried to answer, but one thought kept thumping in my brain. It's him. Is it really him? "Hey, Andrew, do you remember those camping trips they used to take us on after school?" I asked suddenly, trying to make my voice sound innocent. "Of course. How could I forget? Especially the one where we almost burned the woods down in the middle of the night." He laughed. "Do you still go camping?" I looked up. "Sometimes. Not as often, though. You know, work, family, all that stuff." He spoke calmly, but I caught something weird in his tone. Or was I just imagining it? "Do you remember how we used to cut class and go to the park? Been there lately?" "A while ago. Never really have the time, and it's out of my way." "Why, you been there recently?" I shrugged, avoiding his gaze. The whole time, I felt like I was looking at a killer. But Andrew kept talking, joking. His calm was contagious. By the time we parted ways, I'd almost convinced myself it was just a coincidence. But on the way home, I felt like I was being watched. I could practically feel someone's eyes on me, even though I didn't see anyone. Closing my front door, I felt completely drained. That evening, the insomnia hit hard again. Lying in bed, I thought about our conversation, about the tattoo. No, it couldn't be. That's Andrew. We grew up together. And my stupid dreams don't prove anything. Just my brain reacting to the pills, nothing more. But the anxiety wouldn't leave. My head was splitting. I couldn't sleep. And then I made a choice. I pulled out the one pill I hadn't thrown away, the one I'd hidden for an emergency. I swallowed it and finally closed my eyes. And then the worst thing began. A dark wave. No warning. No escape. I was walking down a street, one that was hauntingly familiar. Every step echoed, as if the city had suddenly gone blind and deaf. Not a soul around, just me, the hatchet in my hand, and the nagging sound of footsteps. The apartment building ahead seemed to mock me, and suddenly, it hit me. I knew this street. I knew these streetlights. And when the building with the peeling paint on the door came into view, my heart nearly stopped. But my body moved forward with total confidence, a strange excitement mixed with dread. The entryway met me with silence. 3rd floor, apartment 347. My apartment. I didn't look for keys. I had a set of lockpicks. I didn't even know how to use them, but my fingers were moving skillfully. The door opened quietly. It was my entryway. On the floor, the grocery bags I'd never put in the fridge. In the living room, the TV was mumbling, but my legs carried me toward the bedroom, to where I was supposed to be sleeping. I stepped inside and froze. On the bed, there really was someone lying there. It was me. Something got stuck in my throat. My consciousness felt like it was drowning. It was impossible, but I was actually looking at myself sleeping. My eyes were darting under my eyelids, as if in the dream, I was fighting something I couldn't beat. The pillow was bunched up. I could hear my own breathing. The hand raised the hatchet. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The blade caught a reflection of a face, a smile, wide, terrifying, not mine. "Strange seeing us like this, isn't it?" I said in Andrew's voice. "Sorry about this. I didn't plan on it, but I've got to play it safe." I felt the stranger's hands grip the hatchet tighter, felt the body, not mine, prepare to strike. Fear and rage mixed, roaring inside me, but I couldn't do anything. Just watched as the blade moved closer to my own neck. "Wake up! Wake up!" I screamed soundlessly at myself. And suddenly, something shifted. I felt a power inside, a cold wave. I focused, desperately grabbing onto that feeling. And then I realized I wasn't just watching, I was feeling. I felt the tendons tighten, felt the muscles tremble. This body didn't belong to me, but I could feel it. If I can feel it, I can move it, the thought flashed. In that same second, I tensed the stranger's arm. It froze. The blade stopped midair. The killer froze. I felt his eyes go wide with terror, felt his muscles twitch, but they wouldn't obey him. "What the?" he gasped, his voice trembling. His body started jerking violently. He was trying to take control, but I held him like a vice. A foreign will was fighting, slipping, hitting the wall I'd built. Slowly, through agonizing effort, I forced the hand to turn. The blade of the hatchet was now aimed at him. I heard his ragged breathing, felt the beads of sweat dripping down his face. The killer whimpered like an animal, shaking his head, but his muscles wouldn't listen. I slowly raised the hatchet higher. "No," he whispered. I swung the hatchet high over my head and struck. The blade bit into the skull with a deafening crack. Blood sprayed everywhere. I felt the stranger's pain. Its echo hit my consciousness, tearing it apart from the inside. He fell to his knees, his eyes rolled back, and a final rattle left his throat. Everything went silent. And then I woke up. The nightlight flickered, reflecting in a pool of blood on the floor. A few steps from the bed lay Andrew. His face was twisted in terror, his eyes glassy. The hatchet was buried in his skull. Everything was covered in blood. My eyes caught the tattoo on his wrist, the black vortex, as if it was sucking in all the blood, all the horror I'd just been through. Later, the police confirmed that Andrew was a serial killer. They searched his house and found photos and trophies from his victims, 11 women in total. I never told anyone about my dreams, and strangely enough, I haven't had insomnia since. I sleep soundly.
Just sometimes I have weird dreams. But they're just dreams, right?
As time goes on, the past kind of starts to fade. Memories get fuzzy. We add in details that weren't there, or we lose important pieces of the story forever. But this story, I remember every single second of it. I don't even know how many times I've told it. Probably 100 or more. To my family, the cops, friends, even total strangers. And now, I've finally decided to just sit down and get it all on paper. It all started back in early September of 2002. My parents and I lived on the west bank of this tiny town in the Rust Belt. My mom was home all day because she was 7 months pregnant, and my dad was basically working for 2 people to keep us afloat. During the day, he busted his tail at a warehouse. Then, a few nights a week, he'd go out in his own car and drive people around like an unlicensed taxi until the sun came up. But no matter how late it got, he always came home to sleep. Until one Tuesday morning. I had just woken up and was lying in bed when I heard my mom in the kitchen. She was on the phone, talking really loud and frantic. She was asking if they'd brought my father in. I felt this immediate knot of anxiety in my chest. I got up and went to find her. She was just sitting there, looking totally lost. Her eyes were all swollen from crying.
Your dad, he didn't come home.
She whispered. Her hands were shaking so bad, she could barely hit the buttons on our old landline phone. She'd start dialing, fumble the numbers, hang up, and try again. But he was nowhere. Not at work, not at any of the hospitals, not even at the sheriff's office. Mom let me stay home from school that day. We went down to file a missing persons report, and the deputy at the desk wasn't exactly thrilled to help. He told us we were supposed to wait 48 hours, but my mom wouldn't take no for an answer. Seeing her that pregnant, he eventually gave in and didn't argue. We spent the rest of the day on pins and needles. We called every relative we had. We called the hospitals back 2 or 3 more times. Nothing. That night was the longest night of my life. We barely slept. Every little sound outside made my mom jump. She kept thinking she heard someone walking under the windows. At one point, I actually thought I heard a knock on the glass too, but when I pulled back the curtain, there was nobody there. Wednesday morning, our local priest came by. He and my mom talked in the kitchen for a long time. I sat in the other room trying to eavesdrop, but I couldn't really hear what they were saying, just the low mumble of his voice and my mom's quiet sobbing. That afternoon, we went to church to light a candle for him. My mom was desperate. She was even asking people if they knew any psychics or healers who could help, but nobody had any answers for her. On the bus ride home, she just broke down. She kept clutching her stomach, looking like she was in pain. When we got back, she just sat in the kitchen, calling the hospitals over and over like it was her job. She even sent me to the neighbor's house to get the number for the county morgue. At first, nobody picked up. When they finally did, they told her they didn't have anyone matching his description. That didn't make her feel better. She actually started packing a bag, saying she was going to go down there and look at the bodies herself. I had to talk her out of it. I was just as scared as she was, but I tried to keep it together. I knew I couldn't upset her while she was pregnant, but these awful thoughts kept creeping into my head. I fought them off as hard as I could, but deep down, I was bracing for the worst. But what happened next? I never saw it coming. I couldn't have even imagined it. Thursday felt like it lasted a lifetime. We spent the whole day just drowning in anxiety. At one point, my mom said something that absolutely chilled me.
I'd rather they find him in the morgue than this. Not knowing is worse.
That was the first time I actually cried since he disappeared. We stayed up late that night. I was silently doing my homework at the table while my mom watched the clock. Every 30 minutes, she'd call the hospital and the police again. Suddenly, a loud knock at the front door shattered the silence. I jumped out of my skin. My mom went pale, stood up slowly, and kind of swayed as she walked to the door. When she opened it, there was my dad. He was white as a ghost and had this thick, scratchy stubble all over his face. My mom rushed to hug him, but he didn't even move. He just stood there. Then, without even taking off his shoes or his jacket, he walked straight into the kitchen. He looked strange, really strange. He was looking around the room like he couldn't believe he was actually home. He sat down on a stool by the window, caught his breath, and closed his eyes. My mom literally threw herself at his feet. She was sobbing, clutching his knees, and then she started hitting his hands, screaming at him, asking where the hell he'd been for 3 days. But my dad was silent. It was like he couldn't even hear her. He just opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and stared at the wall with his mouth hanging open a little. I stood in the doorway, totally frozen. My heart was racing. I quietly called out to him, but he didn't react at first. When I said it louder, he flinched. He turned toward me, and I'd never seen him look so hollow. There was this look of total frozen horror in his eyes. Finally, he whispered. "Give me a drink. Just a little bit." Mom wiped her tears and looked at me. I knew what to do. I grabbed the bottle of bourbon and a glass from the cabinet. When he tried to pour it, his hands were shaking so bad, he splashed some onto my school notebook. He apologized quietly and patted me on the shoulder. After 2 glasses, he put his elbows on the table and covered his face with his hands. My mom got up off the floor, washed her face at the sink, and sat down next to him. I sat down too. He was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes out of his pocket. Only 2 left. He put one in his mouth and tried to light a match, but he kept breaking them because his fingers wouldn't stop shaking. My mom finally had to light it for him. He took a long drag, and, with his voice almost stuttering, he started to tell us what happened. "At first, everything was normal," he said. "I was down by the waterfront looking for fares, driving back and forth between the square and the suburbs. I stopped near that little shop by Jefferson Street to grab some cigarettes or a snack. When I got back to the car, there was this old man standing there. He looked ancient, really fragile, with a cane. He was so thin, all hunched over, and I could tell he was freezing. He was shivering. He saw me and started waving his hand, trying to say something, but the wind was howling so loud I couldn't hear him. I walked closer. He was confused, and he sat.
"I'm lost. I went to see my son and got turned around. I don't have any money, just some bus change, but the buses stopped running. Can you give me a lift?"
I asked him where he lived, and he pointed toward the industrial district. He said, "Over there." I mean, what was I supposed to do? I was headed that way anyway, and I felt bad for the guy. I put him in the back seat, finished my cigarette, and got behind the wheel. When we hit the main avenue, I asked him exactly where he needed to go, and he just hisses,
"To the West Bank."
My heart sank. I thought, great, now I've done it. The local drivers never go there at night. It's a 30-minute drive, and you'll never find a passenger for the trip back. It's just a waste of gas. If he were younger, I would have dropped him at the bridge. But looking at him, I just couldn't do it. I thought, if my own dad was stuck in the middle of the city, I'd want someone to take him home. So I cursed under my breath and stepped on the gas. We got to the middle of the bridge and the clutch failed. I stalled out. While I was trying to get the engine started again, I asked the old man which way to go. He wheezed even quieter than before.
"Straight. Just go straight down the road."
I should have kicked him out right then, but I just felt so sorry for him. Even with the heater on, he was just sitting there shaking. His head was tilted, and his face was all twisted up like he was in pain. He was gripping the door with one hand and his cane with the other. His fingers were so thin, you could see every vein. It was heartbreaking. I decided then that I wouldn't even charge him. So we're driving past the bridge, past the houses, into the warehouse district. The old man is dead silent. I kept checking on him in the mirror, but then, suddenly, I couldn't see him anymore. I turned around. He wasn't there. I pulled off the road, stopped the car, and went to check the back, but the seat was empty. He was gone. He didn't fall on the floor, he didn't jump out. He just evaporated. No cane, no nothing. It felt like someone hit me in the head with a hammer. My neck started aching, probably from my blood pressure spiking. I just sat there, with the engine running and the doors locked, staring at that empty back seat, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't wrap my brain around it. I got out of the car to see if he'd somehow fallen out. It was insane. I immediately stepped into this thick mud. I didn't know where I was. I opened the back door. Empty. I started to feel sick. I looked around, and the road was just gone. I was standing in some kind of yard. It was dark, creepy, and the wind was screaming. To my right was a wall made of concrete slabs. In front of me was either a warehouse or a boiler room with broken windows and no lights. I kept looking around, trying to figure out how I got there. A second ago, we were flying down the asphalt, and now I was in this alley. It was like the car, and I had been ripped out of the world and shoved into this mud. No crash, no bump. The road was just erased and replaced with this yard. To my left was a ruined shack, and behind the car, I could see tracks in the mud. I didn't want to get too close to them. I just remember seeing them in my headlights. I don't know what made them. I got back in the car, and I could barely breathe. I tried to turn around in the mud, but I got stuck. I started to panic. I felt this literal fire in my chest. I turned on my high beams, jumped out, and started grabbing bushes by the fence to shove under the tires. The thorns were tearing my hands up, but I didn't care. The whole time, I had this feeling in my back, like someone was watching me. It was freezing cold, but I was dripping with sweat. My gut was telling me I had to get out of there right now. I'd figure out how it happened later. I just had to move. I got back in, gave it some gas, and finally, the car moved. I drove along the fence with my high beams on, but I couldn't see anything. Just 20 feet of light, and then total blackness. Then I hit a corner and turned right. Suddenly, 2 lights sparkled in the distance. Headlights. I slammed on the brakes. 1 minute it's pitch black, the next there's a car coming at me. I wanted to floor it, but I got stuck in the mud again. These headlights are getting closer, but they aren't rushing. They're just creeping toward me. I jumped out again, tearing at the bushes, my hands shaking so hard I could barely move. I was swearing at that old man out loud. I was grabbing sticks and leaves, anything I could find. I could hear the hum of the other engine now. I didn't even have a flashlight, just a lighter that wasn't doing anything. The car was almost on top of me when I jumped back inside. I didn't even close the door before I hit the gas. I swerved, drove maybe 10 feet, and skidded off to the side. I wasn't even thinking anymore. I just drove. Finally, I hit asphalt. There were streetlights. I felt a little better, but I didn't recognize where I was. There were just dark shacks everywhere. No lights in the windows, no people, no other cars. My knees were shaking so bad I could barely keep my foot on the pedal. My teeth were chattering. It was freezing in the car, even though the heater was blasting. I checked the vent. The air was warm, but I couldn't get warm. It was a cold that came from the inside. Breathing felt heavy, like I was inhaling something thick instead of air. And it got darker. The streetlights were on, but they didn't really light anything up. It was like the darkness was pushing back against them. I cracked the window to listen, but I couldn't even hear my own engine. I coughed, and I heard that, but the car was moving in total silence. I was terrified. I drove another half mile and stopped by a pole. The road just went on forever into the black. No stars, no moon. I got out with the engine running and looked around. The wind was pulling at my jacket, but it didn't make a sound. It was dead silent. Just my breath and my heartbeat. I looked at my watch. It was stopped. Look, it hasn't moved since. 12 o'clock midnight. That was the exact time I picked up that old man. And the scariest part? I realized I had no idea how long I'd been driving. It felt like 40 minutes, but when I touched my face, I had a full day's worth of stubble. While I was standing there, I saw those 2 headlights again in my peripheral vision. My heart started pounding. And then, in that total silence, I heard a voice in the dark behind me. It was calling my name. It sounded just like my mother used to call me when I was a kid. Really sweet.
Jason. Jason.
But every time it said it, the voice got rougher. It didn't sound like her anymore.
Jason. Jason.
It got hoarse and low. It wasn't just calling me now. It was screaming at me, swearing at me.
Jason! Jason!
I froze. When I finally could move, I started spinning around, looking for where it was coming from. But it wasn't coming from the dark anymore. It was right in my ear, like someone was standing right on top of me, louder and angrier. I was twitching like I was having a seizure. I was losing my mind. I couldn't see anyone, just those headlights in the distance getting closer. I threw myself back into the car, slammed the door, and cranked the engine. I was soaked in sweat. And then the voice started again. But this time, it was inside my head.
Jason! Jason!
I floored it. I didn't care where I was going. I just had to get away. I looked in the mirror, and the headlights were gone. They were just gone. But I kept flying. I couldn't even see the road, just darkness and power poles zooming by. Then, I burst onto an intersection. No lights, no signs. Just 4 roads leading into a black void. I stopped. My ears were ringing, and I couldn't catch my breath. Then, through the window, I saw something move. Fast, like someone was trying to see who just drove by. I couldn't make out what it was, but it got even colder. Then, thump. The car swayed, like someone just sat down. I felt it. There was something in the back seat with me. I whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. I turned around slowly. Nobody. If I'd seen that old man there, I would have had a heart attack on the spot. My hearing started to come back. I could hear my own breath, and before I could even exhale, someone knocked on my window. I was looking at the back seat, so I didn't see who did it. I spun around, but the window was empty. I just started screaming. Not even from fear anymore, just from being so helpless. It felt like the whole world was mocking me. I hit the gas again. I just had to keep moving. But I didn't know the road. The streetlights flickered, but the view never changed. The same shacks, the same empty windows. The air felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I drove for maybe an hour until my lights hit a person. A woman was standing right in the middle of the road. She had a coat on and short hair. I slammed on the brakes and almost hit her. I wanted to yell out to her. She was the first person I'd seen, but she just stood there with her head down and her hands at her sides. She wouldn't move. I did something stupid and honked at her. She lifted her head. She didn't have a nose or a mouth, and instead of eyes, she had these black crosses, like they'd been sewn there. I felt a lump in my throat. I thought, this is it. She's gonna kill me. But she just put her hands over her face and started shaking like she had a fever. I was pressed back into my seat, hands shaking on the wheel. Then, she dropped her hands. Her face was smooth again, except for those crosses. She turned sideways and limped off the road into the bushes. She moved like her legs wouldn't work right. I didn't move until she was gone. Then I just drove. I had less than half a tank of gas. I was like a zombie. I finally snapped out of it when I saw lights in the mirror again. Before I could even react, a building appeared ahead. The road just ended. There were iron gates and a concrete fence. I stopped about 30 feet away so I could see the sign. It was rusty and peeling. The numbers, I can still see them. 030201. It looked like a date, but I didn't know what the 01 meant. Suddenly, those headlights were behind me again. They were catching up, lighting up the inside of my car. Still no sound. It was freezing. My hands were so numb, I could barely pull them off the wheel. I put it in reverse, thinking I'd run back to the intersection. Then the gates started to open. Suddenly, the silence was gone. This screeching sound, so loud it made my teeth ache, filled the air. I heard the roar of an engine, but it wasn't mine. I hit the gas, but the car wouldn't move. The car behind me was pushing me toward the gates. I didn't see anyone opening them. They just moved on their own. I reached for the ignition, turned the key, and the car finally started. I spun around, floored it, and flew past those headlights. It was a car, a black hearse, like something out of an old movie. I crossed myself and just flew down the road. There was a whisper in my head, and the cold was wrapping around me like I'd fallen through ice. Then, a click. Darkness, a quiet beep in my ears. I realized my eyes were closed. When I opened them, I was looking at a door, our front door. And I still can't get warm. How long was I there? Look at how much I've grown out. There's this emptiness in my chest now, like something was stolen from me. The fear won't go away. Where was I? What were those numbers? Who was that woman? What was that hearse? When my dad finished, my mom wasn't even crying anymore. We just looked at each other, and nobody knew what to say. Dad looked totally defeated. He downed 2 more glasses of bourbon. I don't know what my mom was thinking, if she believed him or not. If he hadn't looked so terrified and his hands hadn't been shaking like that, she probably would have thought he just went on a bender. But that wasn't him. He never disappeared. I felt sick. I tried to make sense of it, but it was impossible. Finally, my mom broke the silence. She sounded relieved just to have him back.
Okay, Jason. It's okay. You're home. Let's just go to bed. Tomorrow morning, we'll go see the priest. He'll listen. He'll know what to do.
No, you go.
My dad said, waving her off.
I'm gonna sit here a bit longer. Just let me be for a minute.
The sun was starting to come up. My mom stood up, kissed him on the head, and went to the bedroom. She whispered for me to go to bed, too. I didn't fight her. My eyes were heavy. At the doorway, I looked back at my dad and quietly said goodnight. He called out to me.
Listen, don't quit school. Don't end up like me, working 2 jobs. And take care of your little sister when she gets here.
He actually smiled. A little bit. I just looked at him. My dad. Finally home. And I didn't know what to say.
That's it,
he said.
Go to sleep.
I nodded and walked away. But I turned around to look at him one last time. Maybe it was because I was so tired. Or maybe it was real. But his body by the window looked see-through. In the morning sun, it looked like my father was glowing. That afternoon, my mom woke me up. She was hysterical. My dad was gone. The doors were still locked from the inside. The safety chain we'd put on that night was still hanging there, untouched. His clothes were gone. His shoes were gone. His car wasn't outside. It was like he had never come home at all. My mom said she'd waited for him to come to bed, but he never did. She said she'd suddenly been hit by this incredibly deep sleep, just like I had. We called his work, but he hadn't shown up. But this time, my mom didn't call the police. She just said,
Let them keep looking.
Life changed for us after that. It was really hard for a long time, but eventually, things got better. I kept the promise I made to him. I did well in school, went to college, and got a good job. I took care of my sister too. I eventually moved her and my mom into the city with me. I never saw my father again. My relatives talked, of course. They tried to tell me he just walked out on us, but I never believed that. Every time I think about this story, it hurts. I regret that I didn't say anything back to him that morning. I regret that I didn't look at him just a little bit longer while he was glowing in the sun. I wish I'd run up and hugged him one last time. I don't know the name of that dark, horrible place he fell into, but I like to think it's not all bad there, since they let him come back, even if it was just for a little while, to say goodbye to his family. They say as long as you remember someone, their soul stays alive. So my dad, wherever he is still out there. I'll never forget him.